Please take your seats. The meeting is about to begin. Remember to speak into the microphone, as this meeting is being recorded for public record. Please stand by. We are going on air in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Friday Finance Economic Resiliency Committee meeting. I will turn it over to our CFO and the staff that is here. We have some stand-ins. I have with me my colleague, Vice Mayor Tanya Bott. We have two, which given the makeup of the committee is now three, we do have quorum, so we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Natalie, I'll turn it over to you and Jason for some announcements.
Sure. Good morning. Today's meeting of the Finance and Economic Resiliency Committee has been scheduled in a hybrid format, with a quorum of the committee physically present and remaining members, staff, and members of the public appearing either in person or virtually via Zoom. In order to participate in today's meeting virtually, members of the public may dial 1-888-475-4499 toll-free and enter the webinar ID, which is 863-6059-5462#, or log into the Zoom app and enter the webinar ID, which again is 863-6059-5462. Any individual wishing to speak on an item must click the raise hand icon if they are using the Zoom app, or dial *9 if you are participating by phone.
Okay, thank you. And just a couple of announcements. Item OB4 will be deferred until May, and items NB 9, 10, and 11 will be linked when heard. That is it. Thank you.
Excellent. So let's go ahead and get started. If we could call our finance committee up, we're going to have a pretty important discussion here. We're going to go with NB1. Tamika, if you want to, actually, you know, wait for Commissioner Fernandez for this one. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. Okay.
Through the chair.
Yep.
Just a little levity in a serious meeting. I feel like we're doing a weekend update on SNL.
Just you and I?
Yes.
Which would be, okay, yeah, Commissioner Bott, given you are here and present, and because it's also a good item, let's talk about NB20.
Okay, let me call it in. NB20 discuss funding needs for bicycle lane improvements and safety enhancements identified in the Bicycle Pedestrian Master Plan Project's implementation matrix, restriping and or repainting green bicycle lanes citywide, drainage improvements along the beach walk to address ponding, potential widening of the beach walk at critical choke points, and purchasing solar-powered electronic speed feedback devices and data collection sensors, MB20.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you to the chair. Jose, thank you for being here. I'll turn it over to you in a minute. But the reason why this is really important, not that everything else isn't, but this is a project we've been working on for going on a year and a half now. And we've made some good headway, and we are going to continue making good headway. But part of that is, you know, there are lots of different types of projects that we're addressing. Some of it is super low-hanging fruit that we can just do. Some of it is more challenging and requires state input. This kind of stuff is in between, which is low-hanging, but we need funding to accomplish it. It is finishing the last block of bike lanes that already exist. It's purchasing the data counters that we need to make informed decisions. It's a bunch of bits and pieces like this that Jose can go through in more detail that will make a big step forward in what we've been working on as we do more of the sort of heavy lifting stuff. And I know it's preferable to go through the budget planning process for next year, but if we do that, then we can't even start making these fixes until 2026. Some of them require vetting vendors and getting samples and doing things like that, so that would delay the progress another full year and a half. And I think that given that micromobility and public safety of people trying to get around in vehicles other than cars or their own 2 feet is one of the hottest topics in the city right now, I would urge everybody to support moving this forward. Jose.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor, Mr. Chair, Jose Gonzalez, Transportation and Mobility Director and Interim Parking Director. So Vice Mayor, as you pointed out, this item is pretty comprehensive. It includes several components. What we've done is we've, categorized those components basically four or five different categories. I'll start with the first one, which is sort of a low-hanging fruit. We conducted an assessment citywide of all the bike lanes in the city, all the striping, the symbols associated with bike lanes, and we've got some bike lanes out there that are in need of repair, refreshing, repainting. And so we actually, excuse me a second. So we identified those, and those are part of the item. It's a long list. Bottom line is that we estimated that the cost of refurbishing the existing bike lanes that we have in the city will be approximately $375,000. And that's more of a maintenance need, which we don't have currently in our budget. Therefore, it would require some either a budget amendment to be able to include that in this year's budget, or we can work through the budget process and try to secure the money for next fiscal year. It could go, either way, but these are more maintenance type of needs where we have a contractor ready, willing, and able to jump on these. We just need the funding.
Can I ask a question before you proceed? So if some of this stuff is maintenance, why don't we have a bicycle infrastructure maintenance line item on the budget?
Well, Vice Mayor, very good question, and we do, but not to this extent. What's happened is that some of the bike lanes are tied to capital projects, which haven't come to fruition yet. For example, there's a bike lane on West Avenue from about 17th Street down to 16th Street. That was actually done with paint. That was done a few years ago with paint in hopes that the West Avenue project would build a whole new beautiful bike lane, and they're coming, but they're not there yet. And what's happened is that paint really was not intended to be there as many years. It's been at least, I want to say, 4 or 5, and it wasn't intended to be there that long, so it's in very poor shape. And similarly, we have other bike lanes in similar situation where there's also been a lot of utility work around the city, roadway construction work that has, for some reason, a lot of our bike lanes just have a lot of patches these days, and that was not envisioned back when they were. Back when they were installed, but they affect the quality, the appearance, the aesthetic of the bike lane, and the rideability of that bike lane, and therefore need to be restored, repainted, and refurbished.
So 2 things. One is separate from this conversation about allocating the funding. Can we, going forward into the 26th budget process, put in a line item for micromobility maintenance issues, which we don't think we need because Project X is going to come online and take care of the issue, but we know, and even as we have sort of unpaused the pause, and we have a lot of projects coming, it always takes longer than we anticipate. Something always happens. So I think it is prudent for us as a city to plan that we are going to need to maintain and upgrade our bicycle lanes in a manner different from the way it's been in the past, because it's a much higher need now, and it's got a lot more attention and a lot more people looking to use this as an option. So that's number one as we go forward into the next budget process. And I lost my second point.
Your first was great.
Well, thank you. The second point was, and this is a pet peeve of mine, because when we go on our walks, our problem block or block party walks, we talk about this all the time. When utilities come in or whoever comes in and does repair work, they leave unfinished business. It's a half-assed patch. No, we're not done yet, or we might do this. And I know there's a process where, and this is not directed at you, but I know there's a process whereby the permit isn't completely closed out until somebody approves everything, but somehow, whether or not it's because a permit isn't actually closed out because there is still some work or whatever, but there are countless examples of unfinished, lousy, what look to be temporary patches, like for a week while the new part comes in, but end up being years. And so, side note, what's wrong with that process that isn't working correctly? And main point is we must get those people who are doing that work to restore the bike lanes if they have destroyed them or parts of them, or repaint them, resurface them so people aren't flying off their bikes because they don't see a bad edge. I mean, I don't know how it feels on your scooter, but I'm sure you've taken a few unexpected jolts. So that's the aside. I would really strongly encourage support for this item. We need to move forward. We can't keep kicking the can down the road. These are small, relatively small dollar amounts to do things that will have a good size impact.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I didn't say that in jest. It's a fantastic point. Mr. CFO, we've talked about this for many years, even before I assumed this position. It's concerning that routine annual maintenance isn't funded in our annual operating budget. And we've started changing financial policy. We borrowed to repair a lot of the annual just routine maintenance, which we shouldn't do, but we had to because it wasn't implemented in the past. But it seems as if we need to be more comprehensive in that, right? Because annual maintenance should be maintained. And then that leads into my second point is it concerns me greatly that we don't keep up maintenance when we have capital projects much further down the road. And I think that's what happens often. If you look at 17th Street or West Avenue or Washington Avenue on 5th Street, some of our capital projects are, 10, 15 years away still? Are we really not going to pave roads because we have something hanging out there 10 or 15 years from now? Right outside of City Hall, right? In front of our convention center where we have Art Basel, the boat show, the most prominent events in the world. It looks like it hasn't been paved in 30 years. And I know that we have the 17th Street project coming up, but there has to come some point where we say that is X amount of years off. We need to continue doing routine maintenance. We need to take better pride in our city. And then on the third point about the utility work that's being done, I see it front and center after we just had, I don't know if Brad's here, but after there was the, I think, FPL project on West Avenue where, they dug up, they repaved where they dug up. It looks like lightning bolts going through 3 blocks of West Avenue, right? It had to have been harder to just repave the portion that they ripped up than repaving the entire road. It's awful. And thank goodness, well, in a way, thank goodness West Avenue hasn't been repaved, because if they came and ripped it up and left it like that, it would be even worse. But do we not have some sort of comprehensive policy where they go, if FPL or somebody else comes up and tears up 3 feet of the road, did they repave that entire lane? Is that something that we could look at? It looks absolutely awful. It's a safety issue. And instead of piecemealing all of this together, can we have some sort of comprehensive policy or overview?
I'll add something, and then I think Brad wants to add something. You and I have talked about this for quite a while, and I do agree. And I think, with this commission, there's been discussion of changes, and Commissioner Fernandez being here is apropos with his, stop the pause policy that be in effect. And, we're going to be talking about moving these projects forward. I believe, and this is back before I was an employee and now, is there was an assumed time when a project was going to start, and then there was a pause. So something may have been, let's not pave this section of West Avenue because we're starting a project next year. And then something happened, and that got pushed out many years. But I know Public Works does have in-depth pavement condition index studies that they do every couple of years, and every single, I think they can, if you pointed to a section of street, they could tell you when it's scheduled to be, because they're they're resurfacing, let's say every 10 years is what appropriately should be done, and they're going to know whether it's going to be hit by a project or they're going to go ahead and do that. And I think by the commission, allowing the administration to be consistent and moving projects forward when they're supposed to is going to absolutely alleviate the issue that you just brought up.
I agree. Playing devil's advocate here and pinpointing a specific street. So the First Street project, right? Mm-hmm. We have it 3 phases. Thanks to this commission that finally got serious on resiliency, we are moving forward with that, right? So that's fantastic. However, it's multi-phased, and there's a portion on the part of Washington Avenue a little further north, so not right in front of First Street, that is part of what, phase 2, or is that phase 3 actually?
Which part, which block of Washington?
Let's call it like
North of
3rd,
Second?
4th, 5th Street.
There's phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3, phase 4.
I think the question is Washington Avenue between 3rd and 4th part of one of those phases? I don't recall.
I'll double.
It's
But
further
anyways,
up,
but-
but
yeah.
Probably in
it's
the second
$100
phase.
million unfunded, and that's
Yeah.
probably 15 years away. But I would bet any amount of money that we're essentially not paving that because it is part of, let's call it phase 3 or phase 4, that, listen, we're moving forward to phase 1 and 2, but we're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that's unfunded and perhaps 15 years away for phase 3 or 4, if that portion gets done, right? We're taking care of the 80 or 90%, the meat and potatoes, and I applaud, I loathe back padding, but we have moved that forward. But there's portions that probably aren't going to move forward, and I don't think that we could just sit there and not maintain regular maintenance on those portions that are likely, decades away.
Yeah, I think absolutely we can take a look at those things, particularly on, other main thoroughfares like Washington, Collins, and Alton Road, and take a look at, where they fall into the plans that we have as it relates to projects and certain maintenance on a year-to-year basis. And also just to follow up on that point, as it relates to like FP&L and other contractors, AT&T doing work in our right-of-way with permits, we will certainly make sure we are more vigilant in not letting them, leave sites incomplete or leaving them in a condition that does not meet, a city standard. It is obviously a frustrating topic for all of us because we go out and we see different things as we go through walkthroughs. And it can be frustrating, and sometimes certainly with the paint that they leave, and that's supposed to, obviously fade away, but it doesn't always fade away as quick as it should. But we can certainly look at those things, and we can, reevaluate some of the things perhaps in our process as it relates to permitting. And, listen, there are worst case scenarios, in my experience in other municipalities where we have held back issuing further permits to a particular, utility because they just could not, do what they needed to do when it came to closing out a particular project.
Is there a standard operating procedure? Because I'm going to send you pictures later of, let's call it from 8th, 9th, 10th West Avenue. I couldn't imagine that they go down to Coral Gables and perform road work and leave Coral Gables like that, right? It would never be acceptable. Quite literally, it looks like lightning bolts going over 3 blocks, and it would have been harder not to just repave the entire street and just kind of go in line with
We'll
what they
take a
tore
look
up.
at the specifics, but there are obviously supposed to be protocols in place to make sure those things don't happen.
Excellent.
If I can share, I think in the item as presented, Jose went through the number of the items. One of the items, and it was already funded in the 25 budget, which was the solar feedback line. So perhaps this could be returned to commission with a favorable recommendation to consider funding during the FY26 budget process for the unbudgeted items as presented, if that's an acceptable motion.
No, I was actually hoping that we could fund it through a budget amendment so that we don't have to wait a year and a half to get the rest of the stuff done.
Is there a particular item? Because I think that transportation has identified a request for a need of $375,000 to repave the green bike lanes, but there was a couple other ones that you didn't have specific numbers on, and I think you were waiting on commission to give direction before you would engage to come up with a cost estimate. Is that correct?
Correct. There's another category which is more capital projects. And so for those projects, we're currently estimating what those projects would cost, and we'll go through the capital budget process for those. We don't have those costs yet, but these are projects that are recommended in our bicycle pedestrian master plan and are pending and low-hanging fruits.
So Commissioner, maybe what we could do is modify what the motion I had stated to also add that a favorable recommendation to immediately in the 25 budget, amend the 25 budget to appropriate $375,000 for the bike lane aspect, since that one is a known amount. Is that acceptable?
The other thing that I wanted to make sure we were getting done very quickly is the Or remind me, Jose, do we have funding for the electronic speed feedback devices?
We do, we
Yes.
have.
Okay, so that
That
was
was in
the other one.
25's budget.
Okay,
we do.
perfect. Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so the motion returned to commission with favorable recommendation to consider funding during the 26 budget for the unbudgeted items as presented, but for, with $375,000 for the restriping of the green bicycle lanes to be appropriated during 25.
Yeah.
All in favor? All right, thank you. Oh, I guess who made the motion will say Commissioner Bott.
I think that's the only possibility, right? Because I can't make a motion.
Right, you're correct. So,
Yes.
so
You second
going
that
forward,
motion?
we'll make the assumption that it's Commissioner Bott making motions. Thank you.
Wait, can we do a roll call vote? No, I'm kidding.
Commissioner Bott?
Let's hear OB3, utility rates, and Mr. CFO, as part of that, because we're going to talk about something that's, I don't want to say uncomfortable, but it's going to give us the reality of some financial decisions that we're going to be looking at going forward. And as part of this, I don't want to just piecemeal it, Mr. CFO, I believe that it's part of Wednesday's commission meeting, just to discuss. I know that we all got LTC, but as part of this discussion, I'd also like if you could just give a 30-second overview of budget challenge that we're going to be facing, not just this year, but on our annual budget moving forward with decisions that were made in the newly elected office from the county. So why don't you start with that, and for further down that path, we're going to get into the utility discussion. But I just want to lay the ground floor of a challenging budget cycle that we're going to face, and then we'll kind of use that to leeway into NB1 as well. Commissioner Fernandez, your item.
Okay, so you wanted to start with OB3. OB3 discussed the issuance of new money, water, sewer, and stormwater revenue bonds. OB3.
That's correct, but if you could also just.
Yeah. And then just to tee up a little bit, I think what you were speaking of is some of the budgetary challenges that we're expecting to have in this upcoming 26 budget. And Tamika, when she comes up on MB1, we'll go in more depth, is, we were alerted recently in the last 2 months that the newly elected tax collector, a new chartered office of the county, our first ever elected one, has availed himself of his constitutional right to take over the state DMV, which runs on a giant deficit, and he's availed himself to modify his office's funding structure to what's called a fee office, which is to collect 2% of the property taxes from the taxing agencies in the county. That's still being looked at, but it's not only the county, but he is also asking to impose that on the municipalities. The OMB office has done an analysis of that, and across the different funding, the general fund being the biggest, the voted debt service, Normandy Shores, CRA and RDA, we're estimating that this will be an additional almost $7 million budget hit that we're going to have to grapple with, approximately $7 million across the multiple different funds. The general fund taking the brunt of that hit. So when we're starting off, and we come in May, and we're going to talk about current service level, which we usually need a few percent property value increase to cover our union contracts, general inflation, everything that we did yesterday we do tomorrow. With that cost, we're starting in a bigger hole. So that's really going to make things difficult.
And just very simplistically, back of the envelope, our budget surplus last about $14 million.
Yeah, I think it was somewhere. I think it was somewhere in that
I'm
realm.
asking questions I know the answer to.
And that was a very good. We had a very healthy, property tax value, property value increase, which we don't anticipate having such a high increase this upcoming year. We believe we will have one, but it'll be a declining increase. So it's something to be very cognizant to make sure that, as you and I have spoken on many occasions, making sure we build a financially resilient city.
And what is the incremental cost just born from our union contract negotiations?
I would like to wait till the MB1 for our budget director. We'll get up to talk about those specifics. But I think for now, what we're going to talk about here, I'll just tee it off before they bring up the PowerPoint here to go through, is our utility rates. And as we discussed, our utility rates were looked at over the past number of years. Back in 2017, there was an analysis done familiar to this. And the commission at the time, I know, did not move forward with the administration at the time's recommendation of those set of rate increases. And they set a specific set of numbers and actually ended up being lower than what inflation has been. So we've actually lost out a nice chunk to inflation, and we didn't follow that, which is probably part of why the pause happened on many of the projects. But, you know, as we discussed, this commission's interest is moving forward to a resilient city to fix our water and sewer infrastructure, our stormwater infrastructure. The commission has already approved on multiple times our stormwater and our water and sewer critical needs program. And our neighborhood improvement program and the phasing of those projects. There's separate resolutions for West Avenue Phase 3, First Street, North Shore D. All of these are strongly endorsed by the commission. And now what Public Works and our rate consultant, who will introduce himself momentarily, will explain is what we have to do to actually close those funding gaps.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. CFO. It's never a easy decision to move forward with something that's going to flow through to some sort of increase, but I think you hit the nail on the head where previous commissions kind of passed the buck on that, and look at what it resulted in. One is those resiliency projects not getting done in a timely fashion. What did that result in? Huge cost increases for some of those projects. So, you know, we're facing a decision. We can continue just kicking the can down the road, but at what expense, right? At the expense, quite literally, of the resiliency of our city. So I'll hand it over to our Public Works Director and our rate consultant to kind of see what we're looking at going forward.
Thank you, Chairman Magazine. Good afternoon, committee. We're going to talk a little bit today about our utility, stormwater, and sewer rates, and kind of give you a little bit of a history. There's a lot of information, so we're going to try to condense it as much as we can, considering, but kind of talk about why we're here and what everything you know, encompasses as part of going forward with these, you know, rate increases. This basically is a process that's going to keep us in line with all of the projects that we have that in our neighborhood improvement project plan for the next 10 years, as well as our critical infrastructure projects as well. So I'm going to turn it over to our consultant, Brian Mance from GovRates, to take you through this presentation and answer any questions anybody may have at that point.
Thank you, Brad. Members of the committee, staff, public, good morning. My name is Brian Mance from GovRates, and I'm here to, of course, talk about the water, sewer, and stormwater rate study. There's, we have we have a presentation, but we certainly have a lot of backup information associated with this agenda item too. But certainly, whenever the utility, the water and sewer, stormwater utility issues bonds, rating agencies want to see a 5-year projection, and to show strong management, it's in the city's best interest to show that the multi-year capital program, whatever it is fully funded. That can position the utility to maintain its AA rated credit ratings and save millions of dollars in interest and issuance costs. So the last formal water and sewer rate study was completed in 2022. That was, at the end of 2020. And the focus was being able to fund approximately $122 million in critical capital needs through 2024. 56 neighborhood improvement projects were not included in the financial plan. And at the end of 2020, we were in the middle of COVID-19. There was no way of knowing whether there would be future inflation or deflation. But the bottom line is that rates have not kept up with the actual inflation. If you look at this chart on this slide, there's about a 10.1% that just the consumer price index inflation has increased about 10% more than user rates since 2020. The bid amounts received are significantly higher than anticipated, and there's been a lot of emergency repairs of pipelines and pump stations. the last stormwater rate analysis was completed in 2017, and it's important to have a dedicated funding source for future bond issuances. In this analysis, there was a rate increase program for 2019, or at least recognized, that was needed to prepare for the 2020, a $100 million bond issuance in 2022, but that increase was not implemented. It was about a 23% increase. The Stormwater 10-year master plan was approved in March of 2024 and recommends implementing neighborhood improvement projects at the same time as critical needs projects. And so here's the fundamental issue associated with these rate studies is a public health and safety issue, and that is reinvestment in the utility system. So we've put together three options. One is the recommended option, which links to the city's master plan, and then there's these yellow highlighted areas show what would be deferred or not funded if we went with some of the other options. And certainly we can go to into the weeds as the committee, based on the preferences of the committee. And here we have a similar chart for the stormwater system, where we have master plan recommendations versus what would be deferred under or not funded under some of the other options. It's also important to note that there's about $67 million in grants that's been awarded to fund additional project costs that are not in these tables. And if some of these projects can't move forward due to a lack of funding, if you can't fund the full project, then you'd also lose out on those grants. The city would have to forfeit them.
And if I could just interject here, we had a pretty eye-opening conversation as part of my briefing. For some of these, decisions are hard, right? But there's no more kicking the can down the road, right? Even if we wanted to, these are at a point, and Mr. City Attorney or Mr. Public Works Director or Mr. CFO, I forget which one of you laid it out very eloquently to me, but it was, if we don't provide the necessary funding for this, these projects are over. We can't just continue saying, oh, we're going to get to it next time, or we're going to get to it a few years from now. We essentially have to go back and say, well, we're not doing West Avenue, or we're not doing Project B, and what that's going to result in is where you're going is a loss of state funding of $67 million. It's not just that we could sit here and say, well, maybe in a few years we'll get to the utility increases and we'll keep these projects on the back burner. If we don't go forward with this, these projects, by all intents and purposes, die, and we lose the state grants and funding that's been allocated towards those. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, Commissioner. So these projects are in various states of design, especially the West Avenue Phase 3 and the First Street, which are in the 90% somewhere in that time design-wise. North Shore D, which is a very big project, I think is on your agenda for the commission to approve the design there. And if the interest is not to move forward, then obviously we would pull that. Design would be, would probably have to be shelved until such time as rates will be adjusted to afford those projects, but absolutely.
So let's get to the X's and the O's.
Okay. Yeah, here we showed funding deficiencies if we don't move forward. We got, we have a lot of weeds on what would have to be deferred or not funded. So these percentages here show what the percentages look like, where we'd have some initial rate adjustments implemented as soon as possible, and then the next adjustments would be implemented at the beginning of fiscal year 2027. I can tell you, as someone that works with hundreds of utilities, these rate adjustments are tame compared to what I see. I mean, I've worked with some utilities that are looking at 18% adjustments per year. I just finished with a utility in New Mexico that it's looking at 25% per year. I mean, these are, like I said, these are not atypical compared to what I'm seeing in other, with other local governments. And this slide shows the financial effect. One thing we do when we proactively, we recognize that affordability is always a concern, and the EPA considers 4.5% of median household income to be an affordability threshold for water and sewer service only. Under any of the plans under all the plans, the combined water, sewer, and stormwater rates would be well below 4.5% of median household income, which again is just the affordability standard only for water and sewer, not including stormwater. So by any utility industry standard, this plan would be considered affordable and can help the city move forward and be resilient as has been mentioned. And then another part of the recommendation is to update the city's water and sewer impact fees, which were last adjusted in 1995 or 30 years ago. And obviously, costs have gone up a lot since then, but these calculated impact fees are very affordable, very consistent with the very
And if we could just go into depth into exactly what you mean on that. Right now, we have, if a development takes place, a developer has to essentially pay an impact fee. And this is per unit, is that correct?
It's actually
If somebody builds a
based on,
multifamily?
yeah, it's actually based on the meter size, but it's paid by growth. It's not paid by existing users.
Right, it's an impact fee for new development, so on a multifamily building that's going up, essentially the developer would pay an impact fee that would equate to $400 per unit?
Is it by unit, or it's by connection to the building? So if
It's by the meter size. It's proposed to be by meter size. That's whatever the meter size is of the development. That's what they would pay. But it's proposed to. It's right now. It's at 390 degrees. $390, and it's proposed to go up to $3,660 per.
What is that, per unit,
By
Brad?
meter size.
What does that mean?
For a 5/8 inch meter.
So if a building, is that if a building just had this one connection, it would be that one payment of that. It wouldn't be, if it's a 10-unit building, it would be that number times 10. It would be just that number.
It's just, it depends on the meter size. Like this would be for the lowest meter size. And if
But if it had one meter, it would be just that one charge.
Yeah, gentlemen, help me out here.
So one-time
Layman's terms.
charge.
It's not
Right?
by,
If there's a multifamily building, is there one hookup? Is there one hookup per unit?
it wouldn't be per unit, it would be,
It would be based on the meter size of
I
the
get
master
that.
meter.
so that charge one time. for
Help
the
me
building.
understand more in my elementary, level of understanding about development and utility rates. If there's a multifamily building, how many meter, what's the meter size?
If it's a 2-inch meter, it would be
I think, I'm sorry if I may.
It's a one-time, it's a
I
one,
think-
the
one-time
building,
charge.
it's a one charge. So that building would be charged $3,660, that's it.
And what I'm trying to get at is these seem like incredibly low rates that are being charged.
It's
And
absurd.
while it's from a percentage basis, an eye-opening percentage increase, just given the level of growth, this is a rounding error in terms of an overall project.
Right, these put you in line with normal market rates that you see in many municipalities. What you see here existing doesn't exist anywhere.
If you had a 10-unit building that had a 5/8 meter, it would be that $3,600 charge. For, a 10-unit building, it's probably be millions of dollars. It's a rounding error, as I think you would said. Thank you.
That being said, I'm certainly fully supportive of this aspect.
I think that is the end of the presentation?
Correct.
Okay. What we're hoping for?
I think if we can hone in a little bit on can we go back to the page about what those rates are going to be this year, next year, and kind of going forward? Yes, right here. So if we can kind of quantify essentially what we'd be looking to approve or put in front of our full commission right here.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
When I had my briefing on this with both Jason and later with Brad and Jay, I was floored at the fact of two things. One is that we hadn't adjusted the impact fees in 30 years. And as a city, this is not the first time we've found out about something like this, the roll-off fees. Remember, there was something, so I'm flabbergasted that when we are looking to find money to fund projects, we do not have a handle as a city on our fees tied to cost of living increases, CPI, or a minimum threshold if there's very low inflation. That needs to be done yesterday. What are we charging as impact fees, wherever we charge impact fees, whether it's waste hauling or parking spots or whatever, we need to take a comprehensive review and figure out what is the deal. In some cases, we might decide that something is priced accurately, but it seems like we stumble across these opportunities to recoup money that we have been leaving on the table for, in this case, 3 decades. It's shocking. It's the same conversation. I mean, I know it's not going to materially affect the costs that we're talking about, and more's the pity, but the fact that for 30 years we've been leaving money on the table that would go to help fund some of the things that we need to pay for. It's completely shocking. So those things need to be done yesterday. Like, we need to make sure that whatever our rates are increasing to after this first 5-year cycle, that we build in that things are tied into CPI or whatever the right number is, let's say 3.5%, whichever is higher.
If I can, Commissioner, we can definitely look at, I think that was going to be part of the proposal when the water sewer stormwater rate ordinance would come in, I believe March is what our anticipation. It does seem we're going to get a favorable recommendation here, and that we could definitely make sure that those rates are set, or the impact fee side of it would definitely be impact to a CPI inflation index.
The other thing I want to say is that I find it amusing that prior commissions talk about the pause and how damaging it's been, which it has been, and I'm thrilled to be a part of the commission who's unpause the pause. Thank you, Commissioner Fernandez.
Stop the pause.
What'd you call it?
Stop the pause.
Stop-
And we
pause.
have Stop the Pause 2.0 coming in the way soon.
Pause the pause.
Stop the Pause 2.0.
But yet, those same commissions that prided themselves on being so fiscally astute have kicked the can down the road on so many issues, the parking issue, the parking rates issue, these kind of sort of basic blocking and tackling things of making sure that we are charging the right amounts. At the end of the day, the issues that we are trying to ameliorate with these projects, that these rate hikes are funding. The rate hikes aren't going for more people or more services or things that are discretionary to a certain degree. The rains are going to keep coming, and they're going to get worse. And the sea level rise is going to keep rising. And the issues that we face during rain season and during high tides, whether or not the state of Florida wants to talk about it in their science books, we are going to be facing them here. And our residents, when their cars are being flooded and they are stalled on Alton Road and parts of Normandy Isle are available to you only with scuba gear, are going to be really upset that we have not done the work fast enough. But the only way to do the work at all, and maybe we could do 4 projects instead of 2 with these rates that we're discussing, the only way to do that is to be grown-ups in the room and do what should have been done years ago, which is increase the rates the way we need to get us to the funding levels we must be at in order to make this city resilient to the point that we can continue living here in a manner that we are accustomed to. I don't see any way forward other than to approve this fully funded option number 1, understanding that it's a challenge for colleagues who are running for elections, but at the end of the day, the issue is to our residents, you need the services. We are ready to pull the trigger on the services. The services have been delayed. The only thing in prior years, now we need to fund the services, and that is the only path forward.
If I may, since you mentioned residents running for re-election this year.
You've been invoked.
Yes, yes. Listen, yes, is it something unpopular to do? Yes. Something that's near and dear to my heart is, equity and affordability issues in our community, in individuals who live on very fixed incomes, lower income residents who could be disproportionately affected by rate hikes, which exacerbates affordability issues. But what's our alternative? And our alternative is, as my colleagues have mentioned, delay projects. We can seek additional funding from the state and federal government, but I don't think we're going to get the level of funding that's going to be sufficient to shift the cost of away from the ratepayer. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so, what is important here, I think, is also, realizing that we can maintain our credit worthiness, by doing this, and that's important. We need to deliver on these projects, and I see that this proposed rate structure is trying to minimize as much as it can the financial impacts on residents while making sure that we ensure our long-term sustainability. And that's not an optional expense. Infrastructure and the integrity of our infrastructure is not an optional expense. It's a necessary investment, and deferring these upgrades will only lead to higher costs and increased risk in the future. So the question is not whether we do this rate change. The question is, when do we do it? And if we wait later, will that rate increase have to be higher? And that's where this becomes, a very easy decision to make, not one that anyone likes to make. I don't think any of us like making this decision, but I think it's a necessary one.
If I could add, Chair, to that, I think when we first started talking, and then again, might have been before you were elected, you had asked the question when we talked about this $1 billion backlog of infrastructure. You said, what do we need to move the needle? It's $1 billion. This moves the needle. This is hundreds of millions of dollars worth of absolutely needed water, sewer, and stormwater infrastructure. This is going to ensure that we're delivering clean water to our residents, that we're not having sanitary sewer overflows, that sewage is being transmitted properly and draining our streets. We don't want to end up being, we have a good example to our northern neighbor in Fort Lauderdale several years ago, who had a massive failure of their sewage system and had to do emergency rate increases and an emergency $200 million bond issuance because it was run to fail at the end of the day. And we were luckily not able to do that. And then, so speaking of the rate increases, the recommendation here is to, right after the rate ordinance is put into place, that the first set of rate increases would be immediate, but to note that for FY26, the October 1st, when we usually adjust the rates, there will be no increase. So we'd have an adjustment now, immediately-ish, and then for FY26, other than the regular pass-through charge, whatever Miami-Dade County charges for water, there will be no additional increase for October 1st, 26. So we have immediate one, May or June, nothing in October like there is standard, and then we'd start again on a regular annual basis. So I just wanted to mention that for the record.
I have a question about that. Because we talked about it before, but it just occurred to me. Would it make it more palatable if we didn't skip the year where we have no increase and just made smaller increases? all
Effectively,
the way
it's
up?
just accelerating the one that would have been October 1st to now. And again, it's important, we think it's important to have that rate adjustment now instead of October 1st because we
No,
are.
not, the October 1st thing is, like, accelerating it is fine, but then we skip a year. So the remaining 3 years, 3, 4, and 5, could we make those increases slightly lower if we started them earlier?
We're
instead of
not
skipping?
really skipping a year, because instead of it being October 1st, it's just being implemented a few months early. Then instead of on the October 1st. So there's not really a year skip from
It's
that
like
perspective.
May versus October.
Exactly. And
But
with
there's
it-
no increase in,
Right, we're doing what would be October 1st, we want to do now in May or
Right.
June. So by accelerating that, we're able to build a new financial structure so that if we have to go out to the markets, I will have to probably come back with a new declaration of intent to issue, which was last done for 85 million. We haven't issued that yet. We've run out of bonding capacity, as you know, when we did Pump Station 28, which was needing, I think was short like $9 million-ish dollars. We had to do kind of an unpalatable thing, which was robbing Peter to pay Paul, where we took money from the DOT Alton Road South project temporarily, because that money's not needed till next year. So that's why we think it's important to get that structure put in place now.
right, I understand that. So I have no problem with starting it now. But then in the next year, the rate will stay the same as it is now.
I had the same question,
Okay.
right? And we walked through it. My understanding is we're not skipping a year. It's actually just like 2 or 3 months, right? So if we would implement it right now and then again in October, essentially it would just be
Double
like
that.
3
It'd be a
months.
Right, it would be a double, so we're just, exactly, so it would make sense to do one now and again in a few
I
months in
understand
October
that.
next.
I'm talking about the back 3 months. So, the back 3 years. So the 26 rate basically starts now.
Yeah, right, and
Which
then
I
there's one
understand.
27, 28, 29, 30. Yeah, there'll be a rate
But
increase every year.
if you took the last few years and put them into 26, so there'd be a rate increase now, then there'd be another rate increase in 26, but then 27, 28, 29 would all be slightly smaller because some of that would go into 26.
But you'd be talking about like 2 increases then.
Yeah,
this year.
it would be 2 increases within 3 months, and that's not the administration's recommendation.
That's the answer I needed to understand.
So-
Okay.
Thank you.
I just need, if I may, through the chair. So what is the benefit between implementing the rate increase immediately as opposed to with the fiscal year? Because to me, it seems like with the fiscal year is the right time to do these increases. And I don't like the precedent of mid-year doing the changes, because then, mid-year you can get, all of a sudden changes on BTR fees. Mid-year you can get changes on, parking rates. I like things starting clean with the fiscal year generally. So explain to me again, what's the advantage?
One of the main things by putting it in place now is we may be in a situation to be talking to rating agencies. We may be in a position to where I have to come back to do a declaration of intent to issue. We have to really look at the financing plan. We thought by building it this way and having it immediately in effect would be a more palatable approach to
But
it.
if you pass the ordinance effective rate implementation with fiscal year 26, you can pass the ordinance immediately. You have, the declaration of the policy for the increase. Isn't that sufficient for you to be able to go out and do that financing?
We would have lost revenue, obviously, that additional increase, 4 months worth of additional increase revenue. I don't know if we would look back to adjust the rates higher in the future then to compensate for those 4 months of additional loss, or we would just look at
Well, we're not
pushing
going
the project.
back and, I don't know, are we going back and recouping lost revenue for not having done it at the beginning of this fiscal year?
No, that's to be applied immediately.
So, I don't know, I just think, this does need to go to the city commission. And realizing that this does need to go to the city commission, and I think that the path forward, given how important this is, to support our infrastructure needs, which again, they're not optional, infrastructure improvements. I think the way that this reaches the finish line is if it starts with fiscal year 2026, October 1st of this year.
If that's a direction of the commission, make a the committee to make that recommendation to the commission, I think we could work within that structure.
And if I could make just a couple of just a few points as to why there's a few additional points. One is that when you issue bonds, the rating agencies also want to see 5 years of history, a historical performance on your coverage. And so as Jason mentioned, you'd have improved metrics for this fiscal year, which I think would help, would favor your credit rating. And the other point is, we've talked about how we're behind on keeping up with inflation, and having earlier recovery is just going to help catch up.
Get it, kind of a time value of money with 3 months, right?
Yeah.
I'm open to either. The one thing, while we kind of chew on that about when best to implement it, I'm rather indifferent. I see the points that you're making. As part of this is, and we talked about this in my briefing, Mr. CFO and City Attorney, I would like our marketing communications department to put together a robust messaging program here, right? Because yes, people eventually are going to be asked to pay more, but I think our residents are tremendously, nobody's enthusiastic about paying higher rates, but if we can show them there's tangible projects that are going to improve our everyday lives, this doesn't just go into this black hole or into this ambiguous billion-dollar budget. We are actually able to deliver on these long-term planned and needed resiliency projects because of this. I think if we can have a robust messaging program there, I think that'll go a long way. I don't think any of us take comfort in doing this, but this is going to specific things that is putting our money where our mouth is for resiliency and the long-term well-being of our city.
Okay, I think we could definitely add that to the motion. One question, just to clarify on it appears the request to modify to October 1st. Would that be for the standard monthly water and sewer and stormwater, but the impact fees would be immediate? There seem to be, I want to just get clarification on it because there's really two sets there.
I think Commissioner Fernandez's premise was to remain consistent and maintain precedent. So while I am flabbergasted as well, Vice Mayor Bott, I always get better at Scrabble every single meeting that I have with you. What was it? Ameliorate?
Ameliorate.
I'm putting that one down for my Scrabble game against Cupper.
I am a full service. I'm a full service commissioner.
But I certainly don't want to appear that we're kicking the can down the road for the development fees. But I think this is for the longer term, so we'll just be consistent in that.
I believe what I'm hearing then is the return to commission with a favorable recommendation to present a water, sewer, stormwater rate ordinance with the initial implementation to start October 1st, and the administration to develop a marketing plan for this infrastructure program, because that's what it is.
If I might, I understand about not wanting to break precedent, but when we did the roll-off fee increase, did we wait until the next fiscal year, or did we implement? So I would separate them, because I think one sort of affects residents, and that's clean. But if we're just correcting bad housekeeping on our side, from a development perspective, I think the impact fees we could start now. We have a precedent for that already. We're continuing it. It's repairing damage that was done for the last 30 years, and it's not really public facing.
A few $1,000 for the whole building.
Is that okay?
That's for new development. Impact fees for new development?
Whenever we, yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
It's a few
Does not
$1,000 for a whole
affect,
building.
existing
Yeah, but
customers.
that's, yeah.
Minor.
I'm good.
Okay, and we'll show commission.
If we can hear from the public, I believe our good friend Mitch is on the line.
Mitch Novick, please unmute yourself.
Mitch.
Thank you. It was a delayed unmute. Mitch Novick here. I've a 37-year resident come March. Our billion-dollar budget was 500,000 a dozen years ago. As seen every October since then, we've had over a dozen utility billing rate increases, which also include newly created fees, such as the monthly fire sprinkler fee. We have hired 500 more municipal employees over that period of time. Has public safety and quality of life improved? Enough with the pork barrel spending. We hear it, we watch it, we're amused by it. But you need to focus on reducing our budget and deny rate hikes, these types of rate hikes, which have had the greatest impact on housing and affordability and the exodus of residents in our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. And I believe we have two other people as well.
Jeff Burkow, please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Jeff Burkow, 590 Lakeview Drive. I would like to speak on behalf of the administration and its recommendation. We have a critical need here, and I think the proposed changes proposed increases recommended by the administration ought to be implemented immediately. And it's not creating a precedent because we have a longstanding and critical need for these infrastructure projects. Just to cite some of the salient points from the administration recommendation, as you heard from your expert, the city's water and sewer rates have not kept up with actual inflation. The stormwater system does not have the financial metrics to enable the city to maintain a favorable AA bond rating and has minimal debt capacity to finance future projects. The city's renewal and replacement needs are not going to go away and will be more expensive to address in the future. And with respect to stormwater, the city could possibly lose grant funding if it's unable to proceed with the projects due to lack of adequate financial resources, as the chairman of the committee has noted. So I would urge the commission and the committee to adopt the administration's recommendations, adopting the proposed monthly water, sewer, and stormwater rates immediately, the pass-through of the rates from the county, and immediate increase to the water and sewer impact fees. And as you know, I and my firm represent developers. Those are the ones that are going to have to pay it. They need to be paid.
Thank
The
you,
development community needs to.
Larry Schaefer, please unmute yourself.
Good morning. I wanted to just highlight that you're bringing out rate increases, and I don't oppose the rationalization here. Basically, you're cleaning up stuff and doing work that prior administrations refused to do. So very much in favor of that. But I just want to sort of encourage you to read the room on financial matters related to the taxpayers. This year is going to be a perfect storm of pain for condo owners. By the end of 2025, the impact of the Champlain Towers collapse reserve requirements laws are going to be hitting condos. You did pass a budget that is ballooning and increased property taxes more or less by 10%. Insurance rates have gone through the roof, and mortgage rates remain very, very high. So when you bring this out, Joe said, let's get a good marketing and communications effort going here. You're going to need it. Because it's coming at a time where there just doesn't seem to be any relief from the pain for these condo owners. And I own a single family home. I'm just speaking, hopefully, for my neighbors who very much, live in condos and pay for this. And the other thing, just to maybe sort of show that you're working on it, I would maybe suggest that you say these increases are going to pay for new sewage systems, and we need that to correct our water quality problem. So if the taxpayer says, hey, I'm going to get better quality water in the bay and in the ocean where I swim and my kids swim and my dogs swim, then I say, okay, great. Now I know why I'm paying a little bit more. And then go out and actually deliver on those sewage pipe upgrades and actually deliver cleaner water, then maybe you have a win here. Thank you guys for your service. Have a good one.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Larry. Larry, to your last point, I agree, and that's what where I was going with the marketing strategy. When we look at the water alerts that we continue to get at Parkview Island or recently on the ocean and things like that, this goes a long way towards really putting our money where our mouth is and caring about the quality of our bay, caring about our environmental issues, caring about resiliency. And while I don't want to minimize the financial burden that I think a large majority of us, I want to say our residents, but you know, we're residents as well that are not immune from that. Can we quantify essentially, if we could go back to the slide that we did before, essentially, I think, you know, for the next couple of years, again, not to minimize anything, but for the average homeowner or average condo dweller, we're talking about a monthly increase of about $15, correct?
The first
Year, correct.
increase, correct, first year.
Exactly. And that's combined water, sewer, and stormwater gets all this.
So again, not to minimize anything, but when we're talking about preparing for resiliency challenges for the future, improving our water quality, not only what's coming into our home, but our most precious resources out in Biscayne Bay, you know, we're talking about an increase for the average person of about $10 to $15 per month.
Just a question. So the proposed rate increases, it's 9% in 2025, in other words, October 1st, 2025, then another 9% October 1st, 2027, and then another 9% in 2028. Is that correct? And then from there on forward, it's 4.5 annually through 2031.
That's for the water and sewer, correct?
Okay, but that's under, you know, today's costs. And, you know, I'm very mindful of inflationary and economic uncertainties. Yeah, that's something that I think, you know, my financial scrabble game is getting better every finance meeting, Mr. Chair. So, you know, could these rising construction costs, you know, construction materials, labor, could they make these project estimates potentially unreliable? And, you know, could we be facing, instead of a 9% increase in 2027 or 2028, a higher increase because of, you know, inflation and economic conditions that we can't foresee right now?
I'll let maybe Brian speak to it a bit, but I would say that when this long-term financial plan is put together, when the infrastructure plan, when projects are meant to be put out there, the Public Works Department has cost estimates that are done now, and they are cash flow escalated. They do index those items to inflation. So they do take, is taken into account. Now, if it's an extraordinary level of inflation like we had here over the past couple of years, it does make it a little bit more difficult. But Brian, can you add a little bit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the actual inflation turns out to be 9 or 10% per year, like, you know, which was, you know, what we had a couple of years ago, but, you know, then yeah, the financial forecast may need to be looked at again. But, I mean, right now we're assuming inflation of around 3% per year, and we're hoping that that's, you know, we're hoping the prices will stabilize. But we have, in this financial forecast, we have included inflationary allowances.
And so what, I guess the policy decision at that point that the city commission could take is, okay, how many projects do we move forward with at that point, rather than, you know, because let's say, you know, you have these, you know, inflationary issues or economic uncertainties, there's, let's say, a downturn that could impact the residents' ability to afford higher utility bills, you know. The discussion at that point could center, well, how many of these projects do we move forward with, as opposed to passing along a higher rate increase than what is being determined?
Correct.
Okay.
One thing you never get back is the time value of money.
Sure.
So you know, you're at least in, the proposal is to increase them incrementally, so that even if you do have higher costs at least the incremental increase would not be as high as if you, if you hadn't gradually started the increases.
So I can, Chair, we would just, I'll state the motion again, just to make sure it's clear. The motion the Commissioner Bott, I think, we have to make. Return the Commissioner favorable recommendation, present the water sewer stormwater rate ordinance with the initial implementation of the monthly rate structure to start October 1st, 2025, and the impact fee adjustments to start as presented, and for the administration to develop a marketing plan for this infrastructure program. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you.
And I think next you.
Next, you had MB1.
Yes. Thank you.
Can we read that in? MB1, comprehensive analysis of impact of rolled back property tax rate on the adopted 2025 budget. MB1.
Good morning. PJ's putting up the presentation. Good morning.
So, yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chair, for bringing forward this analysis. I think we introduced this in November to understand the financial implications of what it would be like to adopt a rolled back budget, not just in terms of immediate revenue changes, but also in terms of our ability to sustain vital services and maintain fiscal responsibility. So we have Tamika, who has put together a presentation for us, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right, thank you. All right, PJ, you can put up the presentation. All right, so we will be talking about the analysis that we did. We were requested back in November to look at what the 25 budget would look like if we did adopt a rolled back rate. So we'll talk about the impact on the city's operations if we did this, the impact on homesteaded property values and their taxes, and the long-term viability of our financials. So just a little background on our budget. So 61% of the general fund property budget is in property tax revenues. And so if we impact our rollback rate or millage rate to be the rollback rate, that's going to impact those dollars. And obviously, because it's 61% of the overall revenues, it's going to have an impact on our operating expenditures.
Tamika, I apologize for putting you on the spot. Mr. CFO, feel free to jump in. Do we have a breakdown of those property taxes? What is commercial versus what is residential?
I don't have it with me, but I'll have it before we get to that.
Okay.
That's great. Yeah,
Yes.
that'd be a great time.
I think I have it somewhere.
And I guess I'll just take that one step further. Is there any way where we'd be able to bifurcate?
No, you can't have discriminatory property tax rates. Property tax rates are set for all properties within a municipality.
And just for purposes of those who are participating virtually or watching at home, we're talking about a rolled back tax rate, and for their purposes, that's the tax rate that would generate the same amount of revenues as last year, as the last fiscal year. It doesn't include new construction or other adjustments, just existing property. Is that correct, Mr. CFO?
Correct.
Okay, just for context.
Oh, let me go back. So on the expenditure side, that's 61% of our property tax revenues is supporting 61% of our overall general fund budget. And of that amount, 60% is just public safety. So that's police and fire. If you did add in homeless services, code compliance, and park rangers, that actually goes up to 64%. So any impact on our general fund revenues, property tax revenues, is going to impact our ability to support those services as well as the other services that are supported by other property tax, other revenues. So what is a rolled back rate? So the rolled back rate is a millage rate that we would charge next year in order to gather the same revenues that we did this year. So that's a calculated number. And based on our FY25 budget, it would have been, instead of 6.1481, the millage rate would have been 5.6354. So the millage rate is broken down into 4 components, as you can see here. The operating millage rate, which takes care of
most of our operations is 5.6636. We also have a capital renewal and replacement millage rate, which takes care of the renewal and replacement of our existing assets. And we also have a pay-go millage rate, which takes care of our other existing assets, and it pays for the funding of new capital projects. And then we have the voted debt service millage, which covers all the GO bond expenditures, and that stays flat. It's a calculated number based on our debt service payment and the value of our properties. So if we did have a rollback millage rate, we would have to change one of the general millage rate numbers. We do not want to reduce our capital or our pay-go dollars. Those dollars we are trying to fund, as we said previously, that $1.1 billion unfunded CIP. We're spending over just about $8 million now from those little millage rates. So what would we impact? We would be impacting the operating millage rate, and that's what we see here. We would propose if we had gone back to a rolled back millage rate.
And just to speak in layman's terms for anybody following along, when we talk about this, if we could, how do you apply that? Is it on every $100,000
Right.
or every $1 million? What would that translate to?
So the math is, if you have a property value of 100,000, you would divide that by 1,000, and then you multiply it by that tax rate. So that would be 515 for every $100,000 of property value.
So essentially, we're looking at 500.
The next slide actually
Yep.
tells you what
Okay.
you're probably asking. So this slide tells what would somebody get in savings in their bill if you actually did do a rollback rate. So you would have the average property owner, if the value is at 778 as of last year, they would get a savings of $399 from last year's, the bill last year, which is great. And let's see the impact of what we'd have to do, what the city would have to do in order to give this back as a reduction in the tax bill. So the millage rate impacts several sources. So it impacts our property tax revenues, which is primarily what we talk about, but it also impacts what we transfer to the CRA and to the RDA as well, because that's just a function of our millage rate. So the big hit would be on our property tax revenues. We would lose $24 million.
That's in the general fund.
In the general fund. The CRA would lose 130, the RDA would lose 3.12 million, for a total of 27 million that we would have to cut from the budget. So last year we spent a lot of time talking about what we add to the budget. If we had gone back to our rollback rate, we would be looking to cuts. And how would that look like in the budget, which is the crux of the conversation? So we would have had to gone back in the budget after we've gotten the property values in July and look for $14.4 million of cuts in our operations. That includes, Commissioner Magazine, you were asking about the union contracts. We set aside $7.7 million in the 2025 budget to cover the cost of the union contracts. The majority of those dollars went to police and fire, but we would have to cut 14.4, and then on top of what we would have to cut on our current service level, we also would have to reduce all the enhancements. So we approved $9.3 million in enhancements in the 2025 budget just from the general fund. And then we also had $700,000 of mid-year budget changes that the commission approved that had an impact on the 2025 budget. So those two items would go, plus we'd have to go back and make $14 million of cuts, which would obviously have service impacts. And it would be hard to have service impacts without touching public safety, because they make up 60% of the budget, let alone all the union contracts that we got approved. And then the CRA would lose funding as well, and so would the RDA. The RDA, the funding that we put there, eventually we want to pay off the debt on the RDA so we could sunset the RDA. That would just slow down that rate. So Commissioner Magazine last year in the budget process, he asked us to kind of show a forecast of where we think the budget is going. And this chart shows where it was at that time at the millage rate that has been approved. And what we saw is that we have a projected surplus all the way to 2029. And then we estimate that we'll have a funding gap. And this estimated that this year we would have an 8% increase in our property values. Last year we had a 9.4, and the year before we had 10.2, I believe. So we estimate an increase, but at a lower rate. And this is where we saw we were going. And we did forecast that we should be, conscious of the choices that we're making, adding to the budget, because we're foreseeing a gap, and that's with a, reasonable estimate of what our property tax revenues will be. So what we did is another chart that showed if we adopted a rollback millage rate, what that budget would look like. So we have the $24 million gap that we just talked about. And if we kept that millage rate flat, which technically would be a millage rate increase if you keep it flat because you wouldn't go back to the rollback rate, that gap would just keep increasing over time, which would put us in a more dire financial situation. So Jason mentioned one of these, or maybe two of these earlier today, but we kind of want to forecast what's coming in the budget process. And we know we come back to you in May, but we have an increase in unfunded capital program. The item that you approved just now will help. If we get that funding, we'll have some additional funding to fund our utility projects. But we also have this long-term financial projection that shows that we're heading towards some financial difficulties unless our property values come in significantly higher, or if we cut a significant amount of our expenditures. And then Jason mentioned the $7 million hit on our budget if we are going to have to pay this additional commission of 2% to the Miami-Dade tax collectors, of which $6 million will hit the general fund. So we're working on the budget right now, and in the budget I have a placeholder for $6 million. If our property values go up, which we expect, that $6 million will go up because it's a percentage of the revenues that we're going to collect. And then last but not least, we had Amendment 5 that was passed by the voters in November last year, which increases the homestead exemption on the homestead properties. So for example, we have two exemptions of $25,000. So for the first $25,000 exemption, that's now going to be tied to CPI. So it's good for the homeowners. I actually voted for it. But every year now, my exemption gets bigger, which means less property tax revenues to the city. And so that's another thing that's going to, curtail the values that we would have gotten.
I'm just playing devil's advocate there, Tamika, with the homesteaded. I saw a property traded on North Bay Road. It was bought in 1990s or something along those lines for $2 million, and presumably was homesteaded and just traded for $100-some million. That should bring in a pretty substantial increase to our city. Obviously, not one property will move the needle, but if we see that kind of, especially in some of our higher value areas.
The only thing I would just add to that is with the concept of portability, where you get to move that homestead exemption. So if the person stayed within the city of Miami Beach, you wouldn't really get that impact because he's going to move that differential between his market value and taxable value over. But if it's a new person, if they're moving out and a new person from New York or the Northeast is coming in, then absolutely, because then you would have that jump in taxable value.
Excellent. So, I kind of framed the back of the envelope just to have things simplistically. So if we had about a $14 million surplus last year, and we essentially chopped $7 million of that, $6 to $7 million of that just for the DMV off the board. And then how much incremental of the new union contracts are we looking at? I think that's about $5 to $6 million.
Well, this year we had a placeholder of 7.7. The impact that it probably will be higher next year because in the first year usually it's not including pension costs.
Yep.
So for any positions that were added, we added 15 positions for firefighters, and so next year we'll have a pension impact. So it's going to be more than 7.7 million.
So Commissioner Fernandez, I love the initiative. I love it. I think the story that we're telling here is we're all going to have to be financially disciplined just to maintain our current tax rate, right? If property values don't come to 8%, increase of 8%, we could be not looking at cutting taxes or even keeping taxes as is. We could be looking at very, tough times at the end of the year. And it's not idiosyncratic to us, right? The county is going through a similar exercise. They just let go of some recent positions. So I think the key takeaway here is this is eye-opening. We're going to have the discussion at our city commission as well, because I don't think it should just be contained within a few members of the finance committee here. The message has to be conveyed loud and clear that we need to be financially disciplined, right? We have been blessed beyond all measures that we've had close to double-digit property tax increases over the past couple of years. And even with that, we are facing a scenario without any unexpected surprises that $14 million surplus on just two line items, right? The DMV and the union contracts just disappeared.
Yeah, well, and I think you've brought up some great points. I brought this up because during the last budget process, we weren't really increasing taxes, but you know, some people were saying, well, you are, because you're not adopting a rollback rate. And so, you know, I wanted to make sure that the public understood what adopting a rollback rate means. It's not without an expense. We would be having fewer officers. We would be having longer response times. We will be having reduced homeless outreach efforts. We would have less parks maintenance. We would have park ranger reductions. We would have slower repairs of our streets and sidewalks, and fewer cleaning services, and possibly reduced after-school programs that we all cherish. And, you know, and it goes on and on and on. And I think so the message here is that, you know, while tax relief, property tax relief is always a consideration, and I think something that we always, as elected officials, would love to be able to achieve, it must be weighed against the tangible impacts it does have on public safety and infrastructure and quality of life. So, you know, this analysis presented today, I think, offers a clear picture of what a rollback rate would mean for our city. And I think, you know, when you see that, for me, the real takeaway is, how do we generate new revenues for the city? And I do think we do have opportunities to generate new revenues. I'll tell you, for example, and this is really out there, it's almost dangerously out there, and I don't even know if it's, I'll probably get slammed online later for it. But no, like for example, you know, you were mentioning, you know, the exchange of property. You know, when there are new transactions that happen, and, you know, you have a new property owner that's gonna be paying $100 million for a piece of waterfront real estate, and I see Tanya shaking her head, and it really is insane that we live in this environment, and what that translates in terms of taxes. But how do we actually, you know, you have areas of our city where you have very valuable real estate, like Sunset 1 and 2 and Sunsets 3 and 4. You know, they're almost like private islands, but they're not private islands. All right? And you don't go into Sunset 1 and 2 or Sunset 3 and 4 unless you have to. You don't cut through those islands to go to Publix. You don't cut through those islands to take your kids to school or to go to the park. Now imagine if we made those islands private islands, the way that Lagos is a private island. I'm sure if you get a waterfront parcel, you evaluate the value per square foot of a waterfront parcel in Lagos, where you have a private island, and you compare it to Sunsets 1 and 2, I'm sure per square foot, it's much more valuable in Lagos because it's a private island. Is anyone's quality of life affected by the fact that Lagos is a private island? No, because no one cuts through there. It's not feasible to cut through there. And I think it's the type of thing we should be doing. We should be looking at, how do we make our real estate generate more money? Ultimately, it's not for us, it's for the public. Ultimately, to support our police services and our cleaning services and our parks services and everything that our city is looking for. And I think we have that opportunity. How do we look at areas like Sunset 1 and 2 and consider maybe, you know, if we privatize those islands, what does that translate for all the other residents in added benefits and for them and to their property taxes? How do we look at like Palm and Hibiscus? No one has to cut through areas like Palm and Hibiscus to get to school or to get to the park or to get to Publix. You know, we look at those areas, and if we were to do that, what would that generate? And I would love for our CFO and our budget team to look into this, because I think it's a way that we can look at addressing some of these issues that we have without really impacting anyone's quality of life. I don't know what you guys think about that, because I'm not a member of the committee. I'm just
No, I appreciate it.
opening up the cans of worms.
Yeah, I think it leads to a lot of interesting discussions about ways that, I think it's twofold, right? We find a way to be more financially disciplined, but then also find ways to raise more revenue, right?
Using what you currently have.
I would like to understand what it means in impact to the residents of an island that gets privatized, to neighbors who live adjacent to the island who are not privatized, and how that would translate into their daily life, and also what the financial benefits could be, because I don't know much about it. I've yet to privatize an island in my life, so I don't know much about it.
Amateur.
I know, I'm just a rookie.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I told you I was opening a can of worms.
There's a lot of different ideas. One I've always kind of kicked around about how we could raise money if we're going to have, we're in a perhaps once in a generation real estate cycle, right? And who's benefiting from that? A lot of very wealthy real estate developers. But if we have something like a waterfront project that's happening on 17th Street, right? And these developers, they're selling for $4,000 per square foot. Yes, the city is benefiting through a significant amount of property tax increases. But let's say that developable height is 150 feet, right, that they're allowed to build up to. Let's use the Raleigh, for example, right? If they have a 10,000 foot floor plate, and I'm just doing back of the envelope math here, let's say their cost of construction in land acquisition is $2,000 per foot, and they're selling at $4,000 per foot. They have a 10,000 square foot floor plate. We would essentially say, you could go and build an extra 10 to 12 feet there, one single extra floor. That could bring in $10 million to the city. I don't know, is that worth it? Perhaps on a one-off basis, we look at that on a project by project basis. I'm not saying we move forward with that, but those are the types of ideas that we could essentially look to be creative with. But no matter how much revenue you raise, whether it's our government, the county, or the federal government, rule number one is we always have to maintain financial discipline, because you can only, the areas where you can raise money are always going to be finite. It starts at fiscal discipline at home.
Chair, if I can, just a couple of items, just, back to Tamika's presentation and the item on the rollback, is just a couple of reminders to, to the residents, is that if you're a homesteaded property, even if you keep, as Commissioner Fernandez mentioned, we haven't increased taxes. It's the same tax rate as last year. You would see an increase if your taxable value went up. But if you're homesteaded, you're capped at 3%. So in that sense, it's basically keeping up with inflation, which has really been the long term. There will be, my second point is that at the May budget retreat, that will be the biggest part of that, where we will be presenting the current service level budget and to let you know what the projected deficit would be going forward, and what the June 1st estimate, preliminary tax numbers would have to come in to make that. So that there'll be a whole workshop specifically where we're going to get in deep, on these kind of concepts. And third, just, the broken record that I know that I am, is whenever there's a discussion about expenditures and all the wonderful programs and things that we want to do, administration's, is steadfast in its recommendation that all of these things should always be presented during the 26, 27, budget process for consideration, to see how much money we have in our wallet to pay for them. So I just wanted to mention that to close this out.
Okay.
Commissioner, we have public comment.
Yes, please.
Larry Schaefer, please unmute yourself.
Hello. I have a few comments. We have a new property appraiser named Tomas Regalado, and he wants to reduce property values based on climate change. So for example, if your home is in a flood zone and you have expensive flood insurance, he's going to look to lower your property value because you have to pay more for flood insurance. This is the kind of guy that might also lower your property value if you live near polluted waters, like on Parkview Island, or right about now we have to bring up water again. If you can't swim in the ocean, the value of your oceanfront property is less. So I wouldn't count on the property values you're getting now after this new politician, property appraiser, has his way. And there's plenty of articles in WLRN documenting his strategy, and I think everyone needs to read those to see what's coming down the line. Also, I predict a decline in condo property values this year due to the 2020, the deadline for meeting the new reserve requirements. So don't assume that you're going to have the luxury of these high values. Real estate is cyclical, and it does go down, and people never want to think about that, but that could be now. Regarding costs and lowering costs, I don't think it's a bad idea to take a look at starting your own local Department of Government Efficiency. Now, please separate Trump and Elon Musk from that, but just consider the idea that this organization is too big and that there are inefficiencies and that there are waste within different departments, and that maybe you could really be a leader in trying to take a look through this organization and see where costs can be cut. And finally, I know this isn't going to be received well at all by some people, but the state of Utah has banned government unions except for police and fire.
Thank you, Larry.
And so other states, yep.
I don't want to get Tanya
Yeah,
or the
I would
Vice
just
Mayor
like to
or
say,
Raul.
I am all in favor of being a better, more efficient, more consistent, and more flexible government. And I value outside of the box thinking on how to get there. I don't think we want to start making this a non-union city. I don't think we want to start taking guidance from models that are dramatically unproven. And I think this is a dangerous direction in which to go. I want to do the right thing for our citizens and our residents and our businesses and our visitors. We are a city that we hear consistently from all of those populations that they want a lot from us. And we have a lot of challenges that a random city in Utah doesn't have, or different parts of the county don't have. And we need to either accept that's what we are and figure out a way to consistently manage that and keep delivering, or decide we are going to step away from that and not provide countless free services that improve people's well-being, both from parks and rec and arts and culture, but also the services we offer, free taxpayer services or tax filing services, and guidance on how to navigate various government departments if you need help. And we do all sorts of things with this budget, and the vast majority of it goes to public safety, between our fire and our police, which I would be very hard-pressed to believe that our residents want fewer fire or police or code officers or public safety workers or sanitation workers, because those are the areas where we hear the most complaints of insufficient service. So we can strip ourselves back and save a lot of money and go back to the bare bones, but then we are not what we have committed to being. And that is a real inflection point. And I, for one, am not prepared to lead this city, which is so many things to so many people, into a libertarian at best, that's being generous, stripped down, fend for yourself community. That's not who we are, it's not who we have been, and I don't believe that's who we will ever be.
So we'll show the item presented. This was a discussion item, so we can call the next item.
Well, just to add, Commissioner Magazine, the commercial properties of the last set of values we got were 18%.
I'm sorry?
18%?
18%, okay.
18%
The
is
split
commercial
between
properties.
property taxes, 18% are derived from commercial versus the remainder from
Residential and others.
So this might be a dumb question, 18% of value or 18% based on number of units or
18% of
properties?
the value of what's levied. So of the total levy of 332, they would be like 59 million.
And do they have the equivalent of commercial property equivalent of homestead?
No. No.
It's meant,
Only-
it's a protect residence.
Yeah.
No, I know that, but is there anything,
No.
you know, so so the Fountain Blues, costs go up every single year with,
No, they would, my understanding is their taxable rate is at market rate.
And one other thing, if I may, through the chair, a business owner can always challenge the property taxes in years where their revenues have decreased. So there may be years where property tax for a commercial property will actually go down.
Right, and that's the Value Adjustment Board, which is a very common practice, especially in the commercial area.
right, so essentially if they are a, commercial hospitality establishment and their revenues go down and they essentially say their appraised values based on their cash flows or
That's
NOI.
a good point.
That's exactly right.
So with a VAB, with a Value Adjustment Board, so when people appeal their taxable value, are we observing those appeals? Because, I mean, I think anyone that's able to hire an attorney will be able to find an argument in which to appeal. We had a caller and say, well, the water quality around my island. Yeah, I live waterfront, but the water quality is not good, so my value should be less. I don't even want to come up with. I don't want to give people ideas of other things that are crossing my mind of other things they could use to appeal. But do we observe? Do we track these appeals? Do we have standing in these appeals? Because we're an affected taxing district. So just wondering what standing do we have, Mr. Attorney, as it relates to these appeals?
I think anybody could observe the appeals. I don't know that you.
Not observe, that's done in public.
but-
That the Value Adjustment
Right.
Board is a public hearing, but standing.
Yeah, I would need to look into that, I suppose, because we are a direct beneficiary of the tax, but Jason is shaking his head, so he seems to
Yeah,
know.
and definitely not an attorney. But I don't believe that there's a role for that in working in other municipalities. No, there's never been really a need to observe, because that's between whoever owns that property, let's say my house, between me and the Value Adjustment Board and the appraiser.
But you're talking about, okay, the typical situation is commercial properties that appeal.
It could be any property. I mean, whether it's a commercial or residential, everyone legally has the ability to appeal their value.
Generally speaking, the appeals are mostly commercial because they're tied to cash flow.
So a commercial property appeals, they're making, they might make some crazy claim, let's say, to lower the amount of taxes they have to pay. We don't have the ability to go in there and challenge that.
Let me look into that and
Find out,
get back
please,
to this.
because I think that's very important. I remember one year I actually went in and I did an analysis of this. It was probably like 3 years ago, and I almost contacted our inspector general, who's sitting in the audience, about it, because it was just fascinating how in one area of the city where it was consistent, it was kind of like the same landlord in this area. You just saw consistency that all those properties had every year the same amount of reduction to their value. And it was very different than in other corridors. Like I actually had one corridor, like I went down Washington Avenue, Collins Avenue, I went down Lincoln Road and saw what were the property values, the assessed values, and then what were the appeals and what they were granted in terms of the reduction. And it was insane to me how in one corridor, it was like this property owner was able to get all their properties reduced by a certain percentage, unlike any other corridor. And it just made me wonder at the time, well, do we have a say in this? Can we fight this in any way? Can we make sure that the statements being made about the city that could be influencing this decision is accurate? Because it affects our bottom line at the end of the day. So, Mr. Attorney, if you could get back to us with information on that, I think it would be very helpful.
I fear that I don't think it is at this moment, but I fear that this conversation could slide very easily into dangerous territory. And, you know, when you look at your tax bill and you're like, I've got money going to the schools, my kids are out of school, I don't feel like I need to pay taxes to go to the school. Or I've never had a fire, I don't want my tax dollars going to the fire department, I don't need them. You know, I'm all for efficiency, I'm all for departments speaking to each other to maximize synergies where there are. I think the city has come a long way since I first started being involved in interdepartmental collaboration and sharing of information. There's always room for improvement. I think procurement processes can always be evaluated. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, but to start questioning, and Commissioner Fernandez, I'm not suggesting this is questioning the fundamental, what you just suggested was questioning, but what I fear is that other people are going to take what is a very legitimate inquiry and extrapolate it to the furthest possible outcome, where people, we see it for years, selecting the facts they choose to adhere to or recognize.
But I'm saying the opposite.
No, but I understand that. But what I'm saying is I fear that these conversations about what is the role of government, what we provide, what we do, what we will do in the future could get away from us. I think here we're having a very robust conversation. What I don't want to have happen is for folks to take the kernel of an idea and then run with it and start saying, you know, I have never gone to the New World Symphony wall cast, therefore I don't want a single penny of my dollars going to support their efforts. So,
but what I'm saying and through the chair is, like, for example, we have commercial landlords that keep their properties vacant. We know that there's been precedent in the past where property owners can go to the Value Adjustment Board and say, well, I'm not able to rent out my property, so give me a discount on my value, on my taxable value. And, well, are they choosing to keep their property vacant? Have they had opportunities to rent their property? Is keeping their property vacant affecting the general economy of the surrounding area? And if so, you know, we need to be aware of that, because now not only is that vacant property affecting the economy of the surrounding area, but now also that vacant property is going and taking money away from the taxpayers, where other property owners who are responsible and contributing property owners are actually then having to pay a higher rate.
yeah,
So we really need to be, Mr. Attorney, please, we need to be on top of this.
yeah,
Yes,
I mean, we
we are.
see it in North Beach, where literally property owners, commercial property owners are literally saying, I'm going to hold on to it until I get, you know, until the zoning laws change and I can build higher and denser on it.
Yeah.
And that is very bad for the city. So, again, it's not this issue, your suggestion in particular, it's that my fear is that folks out in the ether are going to be, you know, twisting the intent of the dialogue to do damaging things. So
I think that's the end of the rollback item.
Yeah.
Next.
Excellent. No, it's an important one, right? Because I don't want to, it does none of us any justice, or our residents any justice, to paint an overly rosy picture. I don't mean to sound an alarm, but we are, compared to where we were in the past, going to be going into a challenging budget year, right? Just by 2 line items that essentially eliminates our entire budget surplus that we experienced last year. I'm going to try and lead by example on something. And listen, the only way to start making big changes is by small ones. I'm going to hear NB 16, aid housing allowance. And I'll tee this up where I was essentially going.
If I can call the item, sorry.
Yep.
MB 16.
Well, that was one of the things that we were going to cut out. you calling the item.
Discuss proposed resolution of the mayor and commission of the city of Miami Beach, Florida, authorizing a stipend in the amount of $500 per month for each city commissioner aid to enable these critical members of the staff to find suitable housing in the city of Miami Beach, MB 16.
Yeah, listen, we get the credit, and a lot of times, more often than the credit, the scorn. but our aides are the ones that really put in the full-time effort, the work. They are oftentimes the heroes in this operation going forward. And it's been a huge initiative of mine. I can remember sitting there as a private citizen, Commissioner Fernandez, hearing you talk about ways to incentivize employees to live in our city. When we had an awful traffic accident last evening on the MacArthur end, quick public service announcement, please do not drink and drive. Please, please. It's the easiest thing to avoid. It's the most selfish thing anybody could ever do, and it has real life consequences. But that being said, it snarled traffic, had a number of people that live outside of the city that weren't able to get here or got here late. Rick? I kid. But point being, you provide incentives for people to live here, and our aides work a very helter-skelter schedule. It's unpredictable. It's early mornings. It's late evenings. It's weekends. So my original thought was to provide $500 per month to incentivize them to essentially live in our city. Part of it is self-serving, so they can spend more time here, and they are even more on beck and call. That being said, we just got done for the last 2 hours highlighting how incredibly pinched our budget is. So while originally I was going to go forward and ask for a new budget item, I'd like to maybe possibly slightly amend this and see how my colleagues feel about this. Several months ago, it was approved where each commissioner got I believe the total amount was $15,000 for like miscellaneous expenses for conferences,
Events and travel.
yeah, events, travel, and things like that. That's already been allocated. That's been approved. That's an existing line item. I guess what I'll gauge the temperature of my colleagues is, at a commissioner's discretion, can they provide, let's call it a $250 to $300 per month stipend to their aides for a housing allowance living in the city out of that stipend that has already been approved. So this would be providing incentives for our aides to live here. It's much needed, but we'd be doing so with fiscal responsibility. A commissioner could choose, you know what, I don't think that that's important to me, or if it is important to them, pay for it out of that stipend that's already been approved for the events, conferences, travel, and miscellaneous expenses. So is in an additional miscellaneous expense that could be included in that allowance is housing stipend for that individual commissioner's aides. Would that be?
Sure, I think we would just need to amend the resolution that originally authorized the 15,000 per commissioner allowance for attending various events and.
I think, perhaps, I think there's a resolution attached to this, which originally a commission. I think you might just amend this resolution that would allow, and I'm going to try to, return to commission with a favorable recommendation to provide each commissioner's aide with a City of Miami Beach housing stipend of insert dollar value here. I think
$300.
$300 to be funded from each commissioner's $15,000 events and travel budget at each commissioner's discretion. I think that's what you were.
Yeah, so we wouldn't be, that's already been budgeted, allocated, and approved, so we wouldn't be increasing our budget whatsoever. It would just be the commission that already had this incremental stipend approved. We, at our discretion, if instead of attending a conference or something along those lines, if we would rather give that to our individual aides for a housing stipend, we would be able to do so.
Yeah, I think I know it would not require a budget amendment or anything
Right.
coming back to the commission. What would just happen is that I guess you would work with the mayor's chief of staff, who and your office manager, who I think keeps track, I guess, of each other $15,000. If you avail yourself of that, you would just have to work with the HR department to have that new one allocated, and then the mayor commission office would then process a budget transfer to transfer whatever that fiscal year's amount is from that general ledger account to another general ledger account. So it would just be operational.
So if I could just chime in, I'm fine with that. I don't think that has a fiscal impact to the city, and I think that should be up to the prerogative of each commissioner. what I think is, I think we could look into this pool of money that's already been allocated in the budget. And like, for example, what if someone really, doesn't go to an event that much or something like that? I think, if someone wants to support their aid, they can, or if someone wants to, make a contribution to a PTA that's having an activity, what I think is, kind of giving more discretion to the commissioners as to how to use those funds in coordination with either the chief of staff in the office or the office manager, just for as long as it's for official purposes, because I might rather support a PTA or a good cause in the community as opposed to going to a gala. So I just would rather have more of that type of
Agree
flexibility.
wholeheartedly. Yeah. Commissioner Vice Mayor Bob.
I agree on all counts. I like not having an additional budget impact. I like having the further flexibility to use that money for the greater good in the community, and I am in favor. Jason, maybe this is a question for you. At the end of the year, if somebody hasn't used their allocated 15 grand, does it go back to the general fund? Does it roll over to the next year? And if you have 3,000 left over from year one and year two, you would just be brought back up to 15?
Correct. It's what you call a use it or lose it budget because it's allocated for that specific year. So any unused dollars get rolled down to the general fund balance, which then is how we fund our capital projects. So that would just go down to the bottom line surplus.
So does it have to be voted on every year, or?
No.
It's
It's a part of the budget, as it is now. And Tamika was just correcting me, it's not $15,000 per commissioner. It was reduced during the final budget to $12,500. So just as a note, if you did that, you might have, we just have to keep that in account. But the motion, as we had spoken, was just related to that, but then there's other discussions here. So I just need to know if you need to modify the motion, because this relates to specifically giving a $300 per month a City of Miami Beach housing stipend to one or more, aides, and obviously within your own budgetary constraints of your own now $12,500 allocation.
So let's amend it to include that or other benefit, other official usages.
I'd ask the attorney to help with language there.
Well, we'll now go back to the original motion as opposed to using the motion that the CFO referred to.
I like
And
that.
to make it a little broader, I'm gonna make sure that we include language that includes some guardrails, public purpose, et cetera.
No campaigning, nothing along those lines.
Correct.
No payments to people involved in campaigns,
Because there's the limitation, there may not be enough for two aides to have this, the 12,500, you mentioned 300. Is there, and I'm looking to HR here in case I'm offline here, because you had mentioned, I think in a briefing about an option about being up to. Is that?
I mean,
Is that
what Commissioner
possible?
Fernandez says.
Because one may say 100, because I only could afford, maybe I've already utilized it for some travel and events.
Of course.
Are we able to give the commissioner discretion to have it variable up to a max per month per commission aid? And I want to just ask HR if there, anything that I said there would run afoul of any HR rules.
Good afternoon. I'm Lorena Bravo. It's good to meet you. I'm the Assistant Director of HR.
Thank you for all you do for our city.
Thank you. Marla is on vacation for a couple of days, so I'm happy to be here and answer your questions. I'm unaware that there is a restriction in terms of the amount or some requirement that may specify a specific amount. I think that for uniformity and ease of administration, it may make it much easier and simpler to indicate a specific amount for the aides.
Okay, excellent. I think this is good. We're taking care of people that I think deserve and need it, but we're also doing so in a very fiscally responsible way of using money that's already been budgeted and allocated.
And if I may add one more, just for your consideration, that money, whatever the amount is, will be taxable to the employee. So if your intent is that the employee have an additional 300 each month, that amount would need to be grossed up, and I don't think we need to take time here to do that. But I just wanted to mention that.
And just, we do have other allowances with employees that are not handled in that way. Most of them are handled just as a taxable income. So I'll keep it at the $300 per month, because I think you can fit that within the budget. And then I'm going to work with the city attorney, I guess, to add additional language about opening up additional uses of the $12,500 per commissioner allocation, if that's what I'm hearing. Are you okay with that, Rick?
Right, we're gonna modify the original reso from last year to add more flexibility, correct?
So there'll be two resolutions. That'll be the 15,000, that one, and
I think we could subsume the one that was on the agenda into, so we can keep it at one reso.
okay. And it was a city.
It'll be one new reso amending the original reso.
Okay, and it was a city attorney reso, so.
I think it was placed on the agenda by the city attorney, but I think the finance department was the one working on it.
Wow.
Kids.
All in favor? Oh, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Excellent. And, talking about our budget and things like that, let's go to NB 19, the Roosevelt Theater. I know in our briefing, it seemed a great cause initiative. The feedback we got, I'm really hoping that there's a private sector solution, because from a government standpoint, I think it would be a stretch, but why don't we run through that? I don't know if Commissioner Rosa Gonzalez is listening. I know it's her item, but it's been some time, and I think it'll actually fall off if it's not heard today. So let's hear that, but I think it's a pretty clear-cut recommendation from the staff.
Okay. MB 19, discuss administration non-binding discussions with the owner of the Roosevelt Theater located at 770 Arthur Godfrey Road, the theater, for the city's potential purchase of the theater and the administration appraisal of the theater and proposed terms for the potential purchase of the theater. MB 19.
Good morning, Chair, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, colleagues. I'm Heather Shaw. I'm the Assistant Director for Economic Development. Happy to bring this item to your attention. You may note that in November, we sent out an LTC about the discussions that the city was having with the Roosevelt Theater. Last summer, we were directed to, before that was last year, we were asked to explore if there is a way to work with the Roosevelt Theater so it would no longer be, or it would be something that would be beautiful and enhance the 41st Street corridor. Together with my colleagues at Facilities Department, the Facilities Department did an appraisal of the property, and the property value came back at an estimated $16,150,000. And Liz is here. Did you want to add to that?
Let's hear that number again.
16 million. Sorry,
Okay.
I said 16,000.
I was like, I'm in.
I'd say, let's write the check now.
My apologies.
And thank you, Heather. And my understanding, just to have on the record, is we reached out to the owner and he said, perhaps, not committing to anything, but I have something perhaps under discussion or in the works. And if we wanted to step in, he gave a number of
30 million.
30 million.
30 million for that they are, that's their baseline of what they want to discuss. I don't know, Liz, if you want to add
that's
something.
basically it.
So while important, that would just be to purchase it, and then heaven knows what we would do with it, which would be tens of millions of dollars of more. Did I misspeak in saying that the property owner said he was under discussions in ways to activate the project?
Well, they have an internal company that's working with them on coming up on how they can utilize the space. But for us, when we asked them what their price for the purchase of the property, they said 30 million. So, but after that 30 million, we haven't really done a due diligence on the cost and walking through the property to see, exactly the cost of remediation or maintenance or,
30 million would be our baseline, and then.
Yes, and then also if we were to engage in a long-term lease with them more than 10 years, it would require a referendum as well. So all those things have not been kind of flushed out. What we're coming to the committee about is there alternative ways to look at how we can dispose of, and when I say dispose of, utilize the property. And they are in the memo. One is, the city can obviously buy it outright. We can enter into a public-private partnership. We can engage directly with the ownership. There are a number of ways that we can, come up with some type of a disposition for that property. But we haven't explored. We want to make sure that you are aware of what the value was and what the asking price is.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I guess from my perspective, I would take it off the table about potentially buying it, when his baseline is 2 times appraised value, and we don't have a good estimate for what we would do or the incremental cost for that.
Right.
That doesn't mean those discussions are dead forever, just in the iteration that we got back. If people wanted to work internally on seeing if that really is the baseline number, but when we're getting back, do we move forward with any type of discussions in the $30 million range? I lament that the property sits there, kind of abandoned since 2006, but the current iteration of the city purchasing it for $30 million and then figuring out what to do, I just don't think is feasible. But I'll turn that over. If I'm happy to be swayed with a compelling argument, if somebody has one.
Heather, do you know if it's the same property owners as it has been since 2003?
I believe so. Do you have any other? Yeah, I believe so.
I mean,
I'm not sure. We'd have to check, Commissioner.
I lived in that neighborhood for 16 years, my first 16 years here, and I know for a fact a very well-known restaurateur approached them years ago, 2005-ish, maybe a little later, but around there, to use that unique and beautiful space at the entrance of our city to do a very high-end restaurant. And they said no at the time. And so I don't know these folks. I don't want to cast aspersions, but I'm not inclined to spend $30 million on a relatively small property where the use is unclear. I hope that whatever they develop has a way to incorporate the facade of the theater, because it's so iconic and beautiful. And they could be really creative and build something nifty there, but I don't think 30 million of our soon-to-be disappearing dollars should be put to that.
If I may, Vice Mayor, when we put out the RFLI for the city-owned lots in that area, they had put in a proposal to use the lot. I think it's P60 that's behind the building.
Yeah, I remember that, but again, I'll pass on this, so you won't get a compelling argument from me.
So if I can,
Listen, I don't think that investing $30 million of the taxpayers' dollars on that is a right move, because then on top of that, you got to think of how do you improve the property, and there's going to be significant capital costs in that, and so that's just entry. On top of the fact, I don't know that they're really interested in selling. This was us knocking on someone's door, saying, hey, we really want your asset, so I don't know. I really don't think that they're interested in selling this to us. It is a big property, and I think the biggest impact that there is that you're really not, you don't have that ground level activation, and and that's where I don't know if we've engaged in any conversation with the property owner of, well, I got activating the entirety of that property might be difficult, that theater might be difficult, but is there the ability, at least the ground level portion, to look into, what improvements can be done to that portion to at least activate, at least for the purposes of supporting pedestrianism and street level activity, to focus on that, and see even do they need some zoning relief for that, because I just think that lack of street level activation does have a domino effect in that area, in the economy of that area. And so, so while activating the entire space might be a big endeavor, if we approach them and see, well, what can you do as it relates to, a smaller activation of what is more of the storefront, and how can we help you achieve that? Might help us get some traction, at least some low hanging fruit.
I believe a portion, because they own the whole block.
They own the whole block, but you have the storefront of the theater itself.
Right, the storefront.
That portion there, it's dead.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm wondering. What could potentially happen with that? That's not happening now.
We can explore that.
If I may. Yeah, I mean, were you guys, either of you or anybody from the city inside the building? Is it functional? Does it need to be brought up
It's
to
not
code?
functional. It needs repair.
So even if we did some kind of street level activation, which I love that idea, they would have to, or somebody would have to put some money into it to make it.
Which I understand is like in millions upon millions. But if we look, okay, how about a smaller footprint of that that at least addresses, what's part of your urban environment there. You need pedestrianism, you need activity that supports the neighboring businesses as well. At least that low-hanging fruit, as opposed to how do you activate this bigger, more massive space that's tens of thousands of square feet. I don't know how big is the interior envelope.
It's
I think it's over 20.
The lot is 21,538 square feet. It's about a half an acre. And the structure itself is 45,947.
Okay, so that's massive.
Yeah.
That is massive. But the part that actually, supports street level activation is much smaller and might be something much more manageable to work around. And if we can approach them and see what can we do about that, and if we can support them in non-monetary ways, if they need any zoning relief or anything for that, I think it's something that we should be considering to support the economy of the area.
Commissioner, we have public comment. Please. Robin Jacobs, please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to say, Commissioners. My name is Robin Jacobs, and I'm a 35-year resident of Miami Beach, specifically the Mid-Beach community. As a committed community activist, I had the privilege of serving on the Mayor's 41st Street Committee for the past 8 years and spearheading many, many initiatives aimed at revitalizing 41st Street. I'm here to advocate for an opportunity that could transform the heart of Mid-Beach while advancing our city's commitment to economic resilience and community well-being. I urge you to consider the acquisition of the Roosevelt Theater and adjacent properties on 41st Street, the true gateway to Miami Beach. It was a concept that I had presented during Mayor Gelber's tenure. The time is now for this project. It has the potential to become a cultural and community hub, a vibrant multi-use space for arts, education, and connection. It's no secret that 41st Street's in dire need of activation. While private investment is already being made towards future development, there's now a bid. The city has the opportunity to lead by investing in a space that will benefit residents for generations. Imagine a community center where children can find enrichment, support right in their own neighborhood. Picture a street alive with cultural activations, programming, small business opportunities, potentially workforce housing, safe, inviting spaces that reflect the vibrancy of Miami Beach. This is about more than real estate. It's about resilience, community strength, and economic vitality for our most important gateway to our community. Either by financing this or through a public-private partnership, the city can create a landmark that not only enhances the quality of life on 41st Street, but in the whole entire community, but drives local economic growth. I urge you to take a bold step forward to a stronger, more connected Miami Beach. I urge you to not stop the conversation today, to direct city staff to continue the conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Robin, one, thank you for all you do for our community. It's truly noted and appreciated. I'd be happy to entertain in some brainstorming for public-private partnership. ideas for this. I think we'd be hard pressed, from a city standpoint, we'd be looking at a minimum of $50 million off the bat with the $30 million acquisition, and then how we renovate and activate this. But given the adjacent lot there, and then this, maybe it's a prime opportunity for a public-private partnership. If you or the 41st Street bid, our community in general, maybe we can have kind of a community-driven brainstorming session for what the proper usage of this would be. I'd be happy to entertain that, to be by your side, help lead those efforts. But let's talk offline after this.
And I echo that because 41st Street does need the activity. We just need to get creative. $30 million is not the solution because that's a lot. That is a lot of creative. But I think we can certainly look at what else can happen.
So Chair, if I can, I think what I'm hearing then is it's a twofold, is that this would return to commission with an unfavorable recommendation for the purchase of the Roosevelt Theater, but for the administration to engage with the property owner and the bid on some type of street level activation. Is that?
Yeah, and then, kind of an all hands on deck effort to brainstorm or collaborate on P3 ideas. I have absolutely none in mind, but, Robin really made a great compelling point when she talked about some sort of community activation there for the children in the area. Given I believe that we're a landowner adjacent there, I think the city entering into some sort of P3 with another private party could be, the way forward there.
If Commissioner Bott, who would technically have to make the motion, is okay, we could add street level activation to any P3 opportunities. Is that acceptable?
So we do have two comments, Natalie. I always want to hear from our public.
Okay.
Amy Mejo, please unmute yourself.
Hi, Commissioners. Amy Mayhew, Executive Director of the 41st Street Business Improvement District. We are supportive of staff's recommendation of working with the property owners to identify some P3 project with the city. We don't think it's something the city can do on its own, and the property owners have expressed interest and are continuing to express interest on working with the city with the lot in the back in order to redevelop the site into something that is best suitable for the street and for the property and the owners. There's opportunities for workforce housing and creating dynamic ground floor retail opportunities. We'd like to be able to explore all of that with the commission and the city, and we are here and active with donors to be able to support all of that. So we appreciate Commissioner Magazine, your sentiment, and Commissioner Fernandez and everyone's direction on working with the property owners.
Thank you for that, Amy, and thank you for what you do for the city and 41st Street specifically. Natalie, one more.
Larry Schaefer, please unmute yourself.
Hello again. Regarding this item, I just want to say, didn't we just have a conversation about budget and financial responsibility? The city should not purchase this property. This is not the Byron Carlisle. The Byron Carlisle is owned by the city, and so that's the theater we have to deal with. Every city around the country and around the world has old theaters that they want to repurpose. The problem is that these shells are very hard to repurpose. You can scrape out the interiors, and there's very little that you can do. I talked to some development experts. They gave me their time on this. And two options that may make sense are live music venue owned by the current owner and maybe run by Rhythm Foundation or Live Nation, maybe with some street front retail. And the best idea that I heard from these guys was a grocery store like Aldi, Fresh Market, or Whole Foods. You have Canal there, maybe a little Canal front cafe. The area, I'm not sure they have like a discount grocery store like Aldi or a high-end grocery store like Whole Foods. I think even KRG had something to have a discussion on that. And the action may be to go to the Economic Development Department and say, reach out to grocery stores and Live Nation. Maybe they have a proposal for you. And finally, one creative idea might be artist workspaces. Subdivide the place and bring some artists in and have like what we used to have on Lincoln Road with artist studios. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. And I think the comments that you heard from the three of us up here echo the original comments that you made. But then in terms of, doing some sort of artist workspace, given that it's private property, we'd be limited in what we're able to do. But I encourage our economic development team to be creative and collaborative with the property owner, and we could do so with Robin and the 41st Street bid as well. So thank you all for the time on this.
On the motion, all in favor?
Aye.
Item passes.
Thank you.
Let's go to NB5, the South of Fifth employee parking. I think that should be a quick item. Be, I think, pretty helpful for that neighborhood. Jose and your team, thank you for all the work that you've done. And
MB5, discuss a potential parking pilot program for South of Fifth restaurant employees. MB5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jose Gonzalez, Transportation and Mobility Director and Interim Parking Director. So we recognize the challenges that restaurants in the South of Fifth neighborhood face with high employee turnover, partially due to just the challenges with finding parking, the cost of parking, metered parking in the area, competing uses, and the limited supply. So under your leadership, as well as to some extent Commissioner Suarez had also met with the community and was trying to develop some options to parking options to assist. And so we've developed, staff has developed two options that we think hopefully are viable for the neighborhood. And I think we're prepared to, have a meeting with the restaurants and share those options and get their feedback. So the two options include, the first one is the use of the South Point Elementary parking lot. Through a joint use agreement between the city and the school board, the city is able to use, to have joint use of that parking lot during after-school hours, specifically Monday through Thursday from 6 p.m. to 3 a.m., and Fridays from 6 p.m. all the way to Monday at 3 a.m. That also applies to holidays and obviously weekends as well. Through that joint use agreement, it is possible that South of Fifth restaurant employees may be able to park there at a cost. There is a cost associated. The city has to pay the school board an annual lease fee, if you will. And so what we've done is we've backed from that number, we've backed into what a monthly parking permit would cost. And we're at $90 per month per taxes. So $90 per month. When you look at all the working days in a month, that comes out to like $3 or $4 a day.
so, Jose, just to clarify there, the city would make an upfront payment of $15,000 for the year, but then we can essentially go out to a handful of restaurants down there. I believe there's 62 spaces, is that correct?
Yes.
62 spaces, and we could say, okay, there's 6 restaurants that want to utilize this. You can essentially pay $10, or I'm sorry, get 10 spaces, each divvy them up to your employees as you see fit, and we could essentially break even on the cost of that. We can't use this as part of our agreement with the school board as a revenue generator, but we can essentially subsidize or offset our costs. So we essentially, this would be revenue neutral, and Mr. Chair, even that upfront cost, I'm sorry, Mr. CFO, didn't want to delegate my title, but that cost has already been allocated, and this is just kind of moving the program forward.
Yeah, the $15,000 one for South Point Elementary, that one has already been handled by resolution and has been, is in the process of implementation. So that aspect, one of those two options is already done. I think it's the second option at Fifth and Alton that is more on the table for discussion.
So if I may, very quickly, the second option would be the use of the Fifth and Alton parking garage. It is a little bit further from the South of Fifth restaurants. However, it does provide more flexibility because at the very comparable cost of $100 a month, employees are not limited. There are no time constraints. We would set aside about 100 parking spaces in that garage, and they would be available at any time of the day or night, any day of the week, for South of Fifth restaurant employees.
Alex?
Yeah,
Commissioner.
yeah, Alex is just fine. let me ask you this, because I have a separate item, but I think this is a good opportunity to talk about it. Because making the spaces available is important. The workforce has a lack of parking spaces, but then it's also just in general throughout the city for a lot of businesses, it's hard for them to keep their workforce because of the cost of the parking. And I think one of the things that we really need to consider, and I think it might be coming to this committee, is I really think we need to almost see our workforce as a part of our community. They're not our residents, but they do contribute to our economy. And so, how do we extend to the workforce the resident parking rate? I think that that's something important, just because, they're a part of our community. A lot of them deal with, again, fixed incomes. They support our economy, yet they're being displaced, not displaced in terms of housing, but displaced from their jobs. They're choosing not to come to work in Miami Beach because of the cost of the parking here. So, I would like us, in addition to this, which you're taking tremendous leadership on this, Commissioner Magazine, is, that cost of parking and, is it feasible to extend to those who work in our city that the resident rate so that we don't end up displacing our workforce.
Yeah, it's great. I have family. My daughter's mother is part of that workforce that, is burdened by the high cost of parking in the area. So it's near and dear to me, perhaps where that can really be immediately utilized. Because, I'm sure there would be some concerns, areas that are already tight on residential parking, increasing, but especially in areas where we have underutilized garages. In the ACDC, Art Deco Cultural District. And actually, I just had an item this past commission meeting that'll work its way through the process for the 17th Street garage for the employees in, kind of that Collins Avenue, the hotel district, the hospitality workers there. And I just came up with that because I was walking our municipal garages at the New World Symphony on 17th Street and saw how underutilized they are. And then we have the service workers, parking out on the street, oftentimes abusing the handicap placards, or, at very high cost to them. They are an extension of our community, so to be able to accommodate them where we already have underutilized parking in the 17th Street or New World Symphony garage, do so at accommodative rates there. Perhaps we can work jointly on other areas where that makes sense in some of our underutilized garages, so we're bringing more revenue into the city, freeing up parking that might be being, in many ways abused as part of the handicap placards, and that'll actually maybe increase some of our parking rates as, tourists and visitors, they're actually paying the full rates instead of, the employees using the handicap stuff and, parking on our streets. So it's kind of an entire ecosystem that we'd be helping out there.
If I can, Commissioner Fernandez is correct. There is it's future item 25 that'll be heard next month on reduced parking rates for all Miami Beach workforce.
Excellent.
But on this particular item, I think if there's any other comment, it was just return to commission with a favorable recommendation to implement the program as presented.
Yeah. Very cool. Excellent.
All in favor?
You all did a lot of work on this. Dr. Leslie Rosenfeld, if you're out there in the abyss somewhere listening, I know you did a lot of work with the school board as well. So thank you for that. Perhaps one conversation that we could follow up on is the initial feedback that I've gotten. And I think you hit on this, the South Point Elementary parking lot, while much better logistically placed because of the time limitations, could present some challenges. Then I said, okay, well, maybe it's better utilized on the weekends, but even that Friday starting at 6 p.m. is probably going to limit the weekend shifts for some of the restaurants. Let's have conversations with the restaurants and say, what time would your employees need that to start with if they used it on a Friday night? Is it 4 p.m.? Is it 5 p.m.? And then perhaps just for that one single night, we could go back to the school board and say, on Fridays, can we essentially make that accommodation instead of 6 p.m. at 4:30 p.m. or 5 p.m. because it does us no good. The program won't be utilized if employees have to show up to work at 5, but they can't park till 6.
I think that that's a distinct possibility. I know that the children are on campus until, I think, 6 o'clock when the final aftercare is open, which may be why the 6 p.m. is there, but it could be something that's explored. But, all right, we'll show all in favor and the item passes? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great thing when you see things from the perspective of the resident. You're a resident, right? That's what
Okay, let's go to NB 13.
MB 13, discuss earmarking all rent in excess of the minimum fixed rent received pursuant to the development and ground lease agreement between the city and MB Mixed Use Investment LLC for the development and operation of the Convention Center Headquarter Hotel for the purpose of promoting and supporting workforce and affordable housing development, NB 13.
So this was an idea that I brought forward when we had the discussion of the homeless trust funding and how to use, whether or not the hotel was going to go forward, and how to provide affordable housing options in a city where land acquisition costs are so high. And one way, this is money that is going to be falling into our laps, in a manner of speaking, is using the rents coming from the Convention Center Hotel. And the reason why I think this is meritorious of conversation is because, like other sort of intractable issues in our city, like traffic and sea level change, climate change in general, affordability remains one of the biggest problems and most vexing to solve in our city. It drives traffic, no pun intended, but we just had a conversation about where do
Really
our...
not intended?
Really not intended. I'm not that clever to think of these things. They just pop out. Literally our last conversation was, where do our employees park when they drive across the bridge to come to work? So, the more housing we can provide to the workforce at multiple levels of affordable housing, because there is a need at multiple levels, the better off we are. And the biggest challenge to affordable housing is the acquisition cost, whether it's land and you build new, or it's land and you rehab, which is a great way to go, and I'm very much in favor of that. But this is money that is not insignificant and is going to help mitigate traffic issues and improve the quality of our life, and collectively, because the more people you have, eyes on the street, the better off the communities become. And it helps us become less of a tourism-driven economy, more of a resident-driven economy, because we've got people living here full-time. So that's the conversation I wanted to have. I don't know, Jason, is this your item to present in more detail, or is there somebody else?
I think we have Maria here. Thais is here. Sorry, Thais is here, but also I'm available to speak on this. I just, high level is just to remember that the Convention Center Hotel, a nice chunk of those revenues are already allocated, so the fixed portion of those rent is already allocated based on a previous resolution and part of the ballot question that the voters voted on. 1/3 to education, 1/3 to transportation, 1/3 to resiliency stormwater projects. And then just recently-ish, in the past few months, the bed tax portion of the resort tax was allocated to fund homeless efforts going forward. So the main point outside of property taxes that would be talk about generating revenues, additional revenues to the city's general fund to pay for police and fire, would be this variable portion, which the developer is estimated to be in the anywhere from like $1.8 to $2.5 million range over the next 5 to 10 years per year. So I think Thais, I'll let Thais add anything to that.
Oi, Thais, tudo bem?
Oi, tudo bem?
Okay.
Good morning. Thais Vieira, City Liaison to the hotel project. So the lease stipulates that the minimum fixed rent, right, which we have it calculated at 16.6 million over the first 10 years. And the guaranteed rent, the percentage rent, which is based on revenues, right? Gross revenues of the hotel. So the variable rent, which is what we're talking about here, is really a function of the overall revenue of the project. So the calculation of the variable rent over the first 10 years, about 20.4 million.
So I think just that it was listed in the memo there, you know, that obviously this is a very big policy decision of the commission, is just from the administration's perspective is to see whether, you know, one would consider perhaps, you know, the 1/3 value like is done on the fixed rent portion is this a recommendation that's going to be all of it and nothing towards the general fund or a 1/3 or 1/2. So that's really, I guess, the discussion is if this is something that this committee wants to forward to the commission, the recommendation to do this at all or portion or whatnot.
And just the calculation of the 1/3, if we calculate at 1/3, capping it at $700,000 per year, which is what we recommend in the memo, that comes out to about 6.5 million over the first 10 years.
So the way I see it is that, you know, 6 whatever million over the first number of years is not nothing. But in our overall budget, general fund budget, it's not a significant amount. Versus if we kept it focused on affordability issues, and we could, you know, hopefully interest rates would stay high, and we could roll that money over 5 or 6 years, and then every sort of 10 years or whatever, we'd have a nice big chunk of change to go acquire a property or do some renovations or pick up a piece of land. And I don't want to take away from anything that is already earmarked out of these funds. So I'm not talking about touching that. This is purely how we use it. Does it get dumped into the general fund for future use, or do we focus it? And my view is we focus it, we invest it, we get it working for our city, and then we scrape it at every opportune moment when either we have a great deal that falls into our laps, or, you know, it hits a predetermined limit of whatever it is, $10 million, and then we put that into use to affordability issues, because I don't see that going away of its own accord anytime soon either.
And I want to hear Commissioner Dominguez. Mr. CFO, just this is just off the cuff, and I'll caveat it with how Commissioner Fernandez caveated the crazy ideas and things like that. But anything that has a future cash flow can be securitized, in essence, right? Through bond funding, it can be securitized.
Yes, it's a cash flow stream could be bondable.
Right. So instead of sitting here picking up $500,000 or $600,000 per year, could we essentially issue some sort of attainable housing bond that would be paid out of this cash stream over the next 30 years? So instead of getting $700,000 per year, and 10 years from now, you know, we have $6 or $7 million, and we can't even buy a property for 30 years. Can we essentially borrow over the future? Let's call it cap of $700,000 of future tax flows. That way we get that money now. Or we could even go to a developer that is linked with the project that has future projects and say, hey, you do it and you get paid back through these cash flows over time. But I think the easier solution would be essentially bonding that.
Yeah, there's two ways to go. Is there's the pay-go model where you would take that, we'll just use the number 700,000, 700,000 per year, and it builds up a couple years, and you know we make either a purchase to make an affordable housing project, whether we're buying a building or a unit or condo units itself, like Alba's team does from time to time, or if it's a contribution to a developer's project to make a certain number of units affordable, so that's possible. So other than that, but yes, you could bond that out and, you know, get an immediate, you know, chunk of change now to do something bigger, and then use that cash flow to pay the debt.
And that $700,000 is about a half or 1/3 of the total.
I think the recommendation that was in the letter was is if it was 1/3, it's because it's variable and it's kind of
So you'd have
how
like
it
a debt
jumps around.
service coverage
Some years
ratio
it might
of
be
3 times.
Well, it depends on how much you're going to end up bonding it out.
But in this example, the only caveat with that is it locks you in for a long time into that usage of those funds, where today, it could be workforce housing. 10 years from now, it could be another need. If you would essentially bond from future cash flows, you're locking into, okay, that's what this money for the next 30 years is.
You would be locked into whatever the period of paying off that debt if you went down that
But
avenue.
wouldn't the goal of that be to get the money up front so you could do the project now? So even if you're locked into it for 30 years, you're locked into the service of the debt for 30 years, but in theory, the project would be completed, or the projects would be completed within the first 10 years. So it's just, the way we did with the the original GO bond, not the one in 2018, the one before that people were talking about.
Yes, but this bond wouldn't be ad valorem tax revenue. It would actually have a dedicated funding source.
Right,
so
right.
it would essentially be a revenue bond.
Right. But my point being that, we would see the fruits of that
Yes.
bond now.
Yeah.
And just pay it off like basically a bridge loan.
I'm going to regret to give you all these ideas.
No, it's a great idea.
Natalie, can we hear Commissioner Dominguez?
Commissioner Dominguez, please unmute yourself.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Commissioner. Thank you for joining.
All right. Let me see if I can do this without having echo. Okay, I think we're good. I'm calling about this particular item just for clarity. Commissioner Mark Samulin started the private property adaptation program, and he did a resolution in 2020 earmarking the stormwater portion of the hotel revenue to go towards the private property adaptation program. I ensured that it's been funded through the end of 2025 because the hotel had been delayed in getting built, but the resolution is there for that program. And the purpose of bringing that program together and having the money from the resiliency portion of the ballot question earmarked for the private property adaptation is that the city is doing a lot of work to ensure that our public streets are dry, our public seawalls are raised, and that we're setting the standard. And what good is it if all of the public stuff is dry, but then we're drowning out the private property, or the private property is being put at risk? So that was the purpose of this. I don't know if Amy Knowles is in here in the room.
She's coming up.
Okay. Because she can talk a little bit more about this. She has more of the backup. I know a lot of people are new. This was before Jason was in there. But Amy worked very closely with Commissioner Samulin to ensure that our private properties are protected, and she can talk more on this topic as well.
Sure. Good afternoon. Amy Knowles, Chief Resilience Officer. Absolutely, I've been with this program from the beginning, and it's really to incentivize private property adaptation and for flood mitigation. Really important for our city, since 93% of buildings are in the FEMA special flood hazard area. So I'm happy to answer any questions, but it was, presented to the full commission back in 2020. We did have a different CFO at the time. It was very clearly explained that some of that hotel revenue could be future funding for this program, understanding that there really isn't federal funding available for flood mitigation for private property owners. So there was discussion, and that was on the record at the time, and there's a resolution as well.
So for clarification, the money that I'm talking about is from a different pot of the rent money coming from the hotel than this private property adaptation, right?
I would have to, I think Jason would have to.
Well, they let Rick jump in too, is currently the private property adaptation program is funded through the Resiliency Fund.
No, I understand, but
I believe that there was some confusion at some point in time, not this commission, but the prior commission, because there were references in some of the minutes to the idea that once the hotel was online, then the money would no longer need to come out of the Resiliency Fund, which led me to believe, when I read those minutes, that that commission was acting under the impression that there was some portion of revenues from the hotel, and whether they believed that that was out of the minimum guarantees, which we know are currently already earmarked for 3 specific items, or whether there was some thinking that it would come out of the percentage revenue. That is unclear from the record. But I think that the issue that Commissioner Dominguez is raising is that there was some expectation that hotel revenues would help to fund the private property adaptation program.
But isn't part of the 3 earmarked areas that are already identified, one of them is resilience?
Well, it's specific to stormwater projects that would, in theory, at least help to mitigate against rises in the utility costs.
And how much funding do you need per year for the private property adaptation?
Well, right now it's,
606,000.
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
that's
what was
the
that?
current, how the program was set up, was
How
it was
much?
666,000
Per year.
annually, and that was the 1/3 of the 2 million. That's how it was set up initially in 2020.
All right, it's currently funded through this fiscal year, and I believe we have a resolution coming up that'll continue that funding for 5 additional years as this program gets implemented.
So out of the rent, you could do a third, which would cover the resilience program, the private property adaptation program in the future, right? Right, because we said 700,000 for this, for affordable housing is 1/3 of the percentage.
If it's the committee's desire to forward to the commission with a recommendation that the variable portion of the rent would be used 1/3.
Right, so but I'm saying we could do 1/3 private property adaptation.
1/3 to
and what's
affordable housing.
What's the third?
The general fund?
Education.
No, that comes out of something else.
The 1/3 of the fixed rent is also, is
Right, so
education.
that's separate from this. This is the variable rate.
This is, we're talking about the variable today.
So what I would recommend is doing 1/3 to the private property adaptation to ensure that is funded going forward, and the remaining 2/3 go to affordable housing issues.
I thought just the remaining third, right? So a third would also just then flow into the general fund.
No, I'm saying instead of it flowing into the general fund, having it be focused on affordable housing issues.
I think I'd be okay having a third of that, right? That's the $700,000 that we're talking about?
We recommend capping it at $700,000. This is variable rent, so it could be higher, it could be lower, right? So we recommended capping at 700,000. As currently calculated, based on the pro forma they did last year, it starts out, the variable rent, the third of the variable rent starts out at 800,000 the first year, and then it goes down from there. And then the average becomes about 600,000.
No, I'm sorry, on the variable rent,
On the
it's 2.5
variable
million the first year. So, if it is the private property adaptation funds at 666,000, if the condition is to continue the private property adaptation as the existing funding stream of, the first 666 there, 700 more, and then it comes up to, what the committee wants to entertain. If they want to make it as a percentage, if they want to make it as a specific dollar value, and then anything above the general fund, that's up to the committee.
So we might not even have as much as $700,000 in total.
There may be years, looking at the estimates, it could be 1.88 million, so if that's what you used the third, it might actually be less than 700,000. But you could do the thirds. You could do the private property adaptation at 666,000, 1/3 to affordable housing with a cap of 700,000, anything above that to the general fund, or anything above private property adaptation to affordable housing, however the committee desires.
I may have made things confusing. The variable rent, as calculated, it starts out at 2.4 million the first year, and then it goes down from there and kind of staying at the same average as currently calculated, okay? That this is based on pro forma they did last year. So when you do a third of that, it starts at 800, then 786, then 741. What we're saying, we're recommending capping it at 700,000.
Right, but that is a third for affordable housing, a third for general fund, and a third for private property adaptation.
I think we keep the property adaptation at its specific funding amount, which is 666.
So what I might want to do, and this isn't a request, it's a conversation, is to
better than a demand.
Yeah, well, is to continue this until next month and see if you guys can flesh out this idea of doing a revenue bond. Because what I'm concerned about is that we're going to have these small amounts of money that aren't going to be substantive. I mean, it'll fund the PPA, and that's great. But to the general fund and to the affordable housing mission, $700,000 every year is not going to do much. And so if we can use that money to leverage funding for now, where we can go in and buy up a whole bunch of units and refurbish them, or whatever the right direction is, I would be interested in that. Otherwise, I would, and I would be willing to do a third, if we could get to good enough numbers. If not, I do 1/3 for PPA and the rest for affordable housing. But that is all predicated on whether or not we can do this, and what kind of numbers we could generate. So I don't want to have a vote on this until we have more information based on your good idea. That's why you're chair of this group. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah,
Jason?
and I think staff may already be doing some legwork on this. I know we had a conversation about reaching out to bond counsel about doing an affordability bond a while back. I think our bond counsel had concerns about some legal and financial, even some regulatory things, specifically if we used bond proceeds, making sure that there was a valid public purpose under state law for these proceeds, especially if it involved any private properties, buying out of private properties, investing in private properties for purposes of affordability, and making sure that we meet a definition of public purpose. If something could be seen to be of private benefit. I don't know, Rick, if you want to chime in on that. There was also issues having to do on whether we issued tax exempt bonds or not. So if you could just chime in a little bit on that.
Sure. Well, using taxable bonds, there are fewer restrictions than tax exempt bonds. What we've consulted with bond counsel on was a very specific idea about preserving existing or organically existing affordable housing. But we also asked bond counsel to give us a menu of different options that are in the world of affordable housing projects that could be done. And we are expecting, actually we may have received something yesterday with some bullet points, which we will be sharing at the right time. I believe this would be at the March commission meeting that this would be brought, but it's related to this program, not necessarily the exact same program, but similar.
Well, between.
In what way is it different? I don't know.
If I may, and we have to look at that, we'll have a kind of an additional discussion with tax and bond counsel. It might just be the funding stream, where the money comes from may have some caveats, but that's nothing that's unstoppable, something to work through and see if that opens up any additional opportunities or has additional caveats.
Yeah. And not to open Pandora's box, going down talking about workforce, affordable, attainable housing. But if we're going to be using taxpayer dollars, I'd rather do it in a way that increases the supply of overall housing, not just buying existing supply that's already on the private market and essentially taking that under our watch and control. I'd rather, if we're going to be spending money, do so where we're actually increasing housing supply.
Well, I think that will be predicated on whether or not we have strictures placed upon us. And I'm open to any of that. I mean, I think there are lots of good ways to do more affordable housing, and it depends on what we're trying to accomplish where. But so can we continue this until next month to let you guys all figure out what is available and doable, and then we can proceed from there?
Yes, I can work with Rick, and then we'll return to FERC with information on bonding capacity of this cash flow stream and the legality, any legal issues that very may well exist. Thank you.
Is it possible to hear OB1 quickly, or do we need to run and vacate? It's up to you all.
Well, I don't count towards quorum.
Yeah, but you're like family.
We can hear OB1. Discussion on commercial retail vacancies and potential leasing incentives for owners of vacant properties, OB1.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Heather Shaw, Economic Development Assistant Director. Pardon me, I thought
Here we go. So great. Um, we were asked to look into, the administration was asked to look into a potential program called the Vacant Storefront Registry Program. As part of that evaluation, the reason why we were doing that evaluation, as we all have seen, and it's not just specific to Miami Beach, but it is something that is happening across the country, that there are an increase in vacant storefronts. And vacant storefronts obviously have a negative impact on our communities. It deters foot traffic. It doesn't encourage new businesses to come in. So we are trying to explore how we can work together with our property owners, with our business organizations, with the city to try to encourage the activation of tenants in these vacant storefronts. So to do that, we did some due diligence. We called a few cities, actually 8 of them. Some of them are big cities where they were having some vacant storefront issues in small corridors. And then we also called some small cities. Some of them were smaller than us, some of them around the same size, to see how they were activating their vacant storefront registry. So a registry is a program where once a building is vacant, unoccupied, that they have within a certain time frame, between like 30 days to 90 days, to register, meaning that the property owners have to communicate to the city that they are vacant. They pay a fee for being on that registry. And with that, with the listing of the registry, that the city goes about connecting the property with potential real estate agents or tenants and how they come to the city. Now, in talking with these 9 cities, a number of them do not, the majority of them do not share this listing publicly, but the city works behind the scenes to try to make that connection. It is a strong connection of a communication channel of how they connect people. They use the money that they collect for the registry fees to actually pay for the program. Most of them have very small teams. They also do a waiver of the registry for certain issues, like if a building is under contract, or if there's some financial hardship, if the building is going to use the space for a pop-up or something cultural, then they have all these different lists of waivers, and we've added that within the item so you can see. And then if the business or the property owner does not pay the fee or ask for some type of waiver, there is a fine, in quotations, against the property owner for not doing that. And each year also, as they register, if a year has gone by on some programs and they still haven't found a tenant, then the registration fee could go up. There are different elements to it. There's some positives and some negatives. The positive being that it forces the property owner to talk with the city, and the city can work with them to try to find other tenants, to find other ways to activate the property. Some of the challenges are that it is time and staff consuming in trying to follow up with them. That was one of the concerns that most of the cities had, that they really don't have a lot of resources to go after these property owners, and even some of the property owners kind of just disregard the fees, and they don't pay them, or they pay them and they think it's this
So this isn't an opt-in program, right, Heather? This is mandatory?
This would be a mandatory program, yes. I mean, well, it's in concept, but with the other cities, it's a mandatory program. But they find it very challenging to stay on top of it. Like I said, there's some opportunities to it. It definitely kind of pays for itself to a certain extent, but most of the cities are saying that they're not finding the traction and the results that they were really looking for. And a number of them have been doing it for a number of years. It is an option to potentially do, and we've scoped out a program that could be very similar to how it's done in other areas. Another element that we were directed to do was to talk with the business community. So we invited the bids, the chambers, to come and talk to us, and we walked them through a potential program, and they gave some feedback. Some of their feedback was that they really wanted to focus on
kind of the internal issues with the city in terms of they would like to see a more engaged permitting process to make it a little more easier, and that they thought that that may have been one of the hurdles for most of the businesses coming in, and they were not completely in favor of the registry. They thought that the staff focus should be on attracting businesses and not chasing businesses to register. Over the last few days, they've been sending in emails, and I'm sure that they may join on for comment. I don't want to speak for them, but they weren't 100% in favor of it. Actually, most of them said that they wanted us to focus on making the permit system a little more efficient. They want us to focus on communications to inspire businesses to come and put rocket boosters on our communications, which we're already doing at your suggestion, Chair. And then they also wanted to focus on how we can advance the pop-up system. And we spoke about that yesterday in land use, about extending the pop-up programs from 3 months to 6 or 9 or 12 months. Because with the 3 months, if you're a business that you really want to start, 3 months is really difficult for you to get up. It takes 3 months to find a place, clean it out, set it up, and by that time you have to be out. So if we extended that, that might be a way to also address the vacant storefront issues. So where we are now is where our suggestion of having a vacant storefront registry would be mandatory. It would be, if we would have to create, and correct me if I'm wrong, City Attorney, but we'd have to create or edit the ordinance about vacancies, storefront vacancies.
That's correct.
Right. And we would add language that would be kind of a compilation of what we found from other cities, where it would be potentially 30 days that they have to notify us. We would make a listing. The listing would be available internally, and we would work with the business organizations like the bids and real estate agents and potential tenants to try to make those connections. And we would suggest a registration fee, and we could potentially also suggest a penalty for not registering. And that's where we are.
Do we have public comment, Natalie? Because I know the Lincoln Road bid was here.
In Washington Avenue.
And Washington Avenue. So I apologize if we wrongly conveyed that it wouldn't be heard. Perhaps if there's no rush on this, since it was heard, I didn't want this to drop off. Since it was heard, could we open and continue it for 1 month? And
You could bring it back next month.
okay,
You could continue the
I just
discussion.
didn't want it to drop off.
So we can just show the item was heard and to return next month.
Yes.
Yeah, where I am, I feel it's, listen, I am sympathetic to this issue, right? Heather, as you correctly pointed out, it's not unique to Miami Beach. There's a lot that's going on, tax and accounting system, the change of ownership from a lot of these commercial spaces, from your mom and pop that used to live right here to these national REITs and hedge funds and private equity firms that have their own accounting gimmickry, and why we're seeing some of this sit vacant. So I'm sympathetic to the issue, and it needs to be resolved. I don't know if the heavy hand of government is the right way to do so. I think we might be able to thread that needle better of implementing. I just see this kind of going into the abyss, right? We have this registry and we do a lot of work for 1 or 2 months, and then it kind of just falls by the wayside, and it just becomes one of those bureaucratic government processes that, you know, works here and there.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How were the registration fees determined? Is there a legal cap on these, or no?
No, with the other cities, they just, it was a consensus of what they thought based on the budget of actually, the administrative budget of running the program, and I guess they backed out of it. But some of the cities have really high fees. Some were like $250 and some were like $1,250.
So, and that's where I was going to, because, you know, I don't think anyone wants to make things more difficult for businesses. And as you well described, you know, yesterday at Land Use, we had a conversation about pop-ups. You know, in essence, cutting red tape to help businesses come into retail and fill that retail space bring in positive activations into our areas, and hopefully roll out that red carpet so that hopefully, through that pop-up permit, they can finally, make that long-term commitment to our city. Tied to that program is the commercial lease subsidy program that we started a few years ago that I think we can give up to every year up to $20,000 in rental assistance to push out non-conforming uses, nuisance uses out of our commercial districts. And so to the extent that we create this program, perhaps this program can be an avenue through which we can fund something like the commercial lease subsidy program, so that and that's what ultimately I like, and what Mayor Minor has brought forward here. I think this is Mayor Minor's item. I think
It's Kristen's, I think.
oh, it says here sponsored by by Mayor Stephen Minor.
I think he's the prime, and then you have a number of co-sponsors.
So, I just see, I don't know that $300 annually is going to get someone to fill their space. And I don't even know if after 3 years, if it goes up to $2,000, if that's gonna change anything. But if we start the annual registration more like at the $2,000 range, and those funds are dedicated to something like the commercial lease subsidy program that helps bring in quality retail, that's a very different conversation to me. Because that way, okay, you're actually also helping businesses along the way, quality businesses. I mean, we have Churro Place from Spain that's opening up on Lincoln Road that's coming in a place where we engaged in undercover investigations and were able to get rid of a business that was engaged in selling illegal substances. And now we've been able to push that out and bring in positive activation. On Washington Avenue, we have a brewery, a local brewery that's going into a space, and so we have the opportunity to help small businesses if we really take the right approach with this. So I don't like the idea. I'm not necessarily crazy on its own, but if we tie it to the commercial lease subsidy program, it could actually end up helping businesses and landlords who are willing to activate.
Real quick, Heather, I feel bad because we did have two representatives from two various bids, and at my direction, our team communicated we probably wouldn't be hearing this. I thought we could fit it in maybe, very quickly before 1:30, but out of fairness and respect to them, they kind of came and gave their time, and we told them to take a hike. Why don't we continue this next month when we can hear their input as well?
And maybe to assist, we'll bring it back for next month, but maybe economic development can just maybe get with them the two bids and see if we maybe recommend a time certain.
Is there an opportunity between now and next month to have some refinement done? Or if you open it and continue it, does it need to be presented again the same way as it is currently?
I think the committee has some tweaks or recommendations that ED can take that comment in. And
I agree with you, Vice Mayor. I think that what could be shown is that there's no panacea to this issue, and it's going to take, as Commissioner Fernandez was saying, it's going to take a number of elements that we need to activate to address vacant storefronts. It's going to be CLS. It's going to be a number of programs that we need to kind of put together to have as a kind of a package for businesses to support them. So yes, we can definitely modify this.
So then, and I'll just make it quick so that we can wrap it up. My intent is not to put another onerous business expense on a business that is trying to get open or is in the process. What I'm most interested in is the people who've sat on property for 3 or 4 generations, or corporate landlords who, for whatever, what was the word you used, trickery? Chicanery? Gimmickry. whatever tax accounting loopholes they have are preferring to keep it open and take the loss. So what I would be really interested in seeing, because you can still sell your property later, if that's your end goal, if it's rented out now. So I'm more interested, and I have no issue with having the proceeds of this project, of this process, go to supplementing things like the lease pop-ups, fund, whatever. But I'm more interested in focusing this process on sort of the bad actors who are, and I know it's a property rights issue, so I don't know how much latitude we have, but maybe it's something, if you're over a certain size, I mean, maybe we can limit it, do a little bit of research and figure out, are most of the people who are sitting on vacant storefronts for tax evasion reasons or whatever, doing it because, or is there a commonality of their size? Or, maybe there's some common elements so that we kind of protect the people who are doing their best to get their act together and go after the people who are making a financial decision to not lease. And then also that gives us the ability to increase the rates that we charge for this because we know they can afford it.
In the memo, you'll see like in Newark, New Jersey, they charge, their fee is based on square footage.
Yep.
So the bigger the property, the more you have to pay. I'm not convinced that this program will address what you just mentioned because big corporations and private, they'll just pay. This is what the other cities are saying. They'll just pay. Whatever you tell them, they just pay it and write it off, or they don't pay it. At least that's what we're getting from these 9
Well,
cities that we
and
talked
that's the conversation to have with people, because if the intent is legit and the goals are legit, but this mechanism, excuse me, doesn't get us to where we need to be, then we need to rethink. We don't want anybody's wheels being spun without getting to an outcome. So maybe this isn't the right mechanism to generate the outcome that we want.
Yeah, and there is, in addition to the feedback that you got, there is a fair amount of case study out there that, while it sounds good in theory, this hasn't provided the results in a multitude of places that it's intended to do. So with that, let's get the input when our business community is here. I apologize that they sat here and we didn't think we'd hear the item. But I think this was a great meeting. We didn't get to as many items, but we had a lot of very realistic discussions. And it's a big boy and girl meeting. It's not always to convey, positive news, but it's the reality that we're all living in. So staff, thank you for all your hard work and your time. Colleagues, friends, thank you, for the collaborative effort up here.
Nobody yelled at each other.
No one yelled, yeah. And we need to wish each other a happy National Margarita Day tomorrow. Public service announcement. Have a nice weekend.
So are we adjourned?
Meeting adjourned.
officially?
I think we're adjourned. Yeah.